Chapter 240. Qin Wanru didn't expect that she would really run into Wen Shiqi and Qi Rongji. They didn't leave, but stood between a stone tablet and chatted enthusiastically. Taking a closer look, she found that it was Qi Rongji who was chatting enthusiastically. Wen Shiqi was only responsible for standing aside, smiling politely and nodding, and almost didn't say a word. After entering the purple bamboo forest, Chu Luqian asked Qin Wanru to leave first. He had something to do and left. Therefore, Qin Wanru didn't feel embarrassed when she saw Wen Shiqi and Qi Rongji. Since she ran into them, she just wanted to take a look. Seeing Qin Wanru coming from behind them, Qi Rongji's face changed slightly. She looked behind her nervously and didn't find the figure of the man she saw just now. Inexplicably, she felt a little flustered. Something happened to her when she stared at Qin Wanru and the man. Fortunately, she met Wen Shiqi. Otherwise, she didn't know what would have happened. Thinking of this, she looked at Qin Wanru with more vigilance. Qin Wanru came over and bowed to Wen Shiqi. Then she smiled slightly and was about to walk, but was stopped by Wen Shiqi gently. "Second Miss Qin, are you also here to see these inscriptions? I heard that these inscriptions in Huaguang Temple are the most famous, and there are some calligraphy treasures left by famous people and monks in the past. Since I'm here, I naturally want to have a look." Qin Wanru smiled slightly and said very politely. Huaguang Temple had a long history, and some inscriptions had been left for a long time. Even after going through wars, some inscriptions were still preserved. Although they were a little damaged, the inscription in front of her was actually a lot damaged, and even the following inscription was not left. No one knew who wrote it. It was an inscription, but most of it couldn't be seen clearly. Only a few words looked very vigorous, which made people have to be amazed at first glance. "I heard that this inscription was written by Master Qin 600 years ago," Wen Shiqi said with a gentle smile. Hearing what he said, it was inconvenient for Qin Wanru to leave. She stood still and looked at the inscription. The reason why Master Qin was called Master 600 years ago was because of his calligraphy. In her last life, Qin Wanru had seen an authentic work of Master Qin in Wen Shiqi's study, so she knew that he admired Master Qin's calligraphy very much. "I actually don't have a deep understanding of this." Qin Wanru shook her head. "Yes, Sister Wanru loves to play with them. She doesn't like calligraphy or anything like that." Qi Rongji squeezed between the two of them with jealousy and hatred in her eyes and happened to stand in front of Qin Wanru. He meant that Qin Wanru was very vulgar and would not understand these elegant behaviors. Qin Wanru took a step back and didn't argue with Qi Rongji. She bowed sideways to Wen Shiqi and said, "Third young master Wen, I'll go ahead and have a look." "Second miss, please go ahead," Wen Shiqi said with a smile, but his deep eyes were full of doubt. "Does this second Miss Qin really have no feelings for me? Or did the Qin clan really not have any thoughts about him?" Seeing Qin Wanru leave, Qi Rongji was overjoyed. But when she saw Wen Shiqi's thoughtful eyes fall on Qin Wanru, she became more and more jealous. But she also knew that she could not say too much at this time, so she could only smile and say, "Third young master Wen, can you tell me about this Master Qin? I've only seen the introduction of this Master Qin in the past, but I don't know the details." "Actually, I don't know much either." Wen Shiqi's eyes fell on Qi Rongji's face and he smiled slightly. "Third young master Wen, you must know more than I do. Please explain. Please explain." Qi Rongji smiled coquettishly. Because of Wen Shiqi's gaze, her face turned pink and her appearance became more and more delicate. Qi Rongji was very confident about her appearance. "In this case, I'll tell you something I know." Wen Shiqi's voice came slowly from behind and finally disappeared. At this time, Qin Wanru was far away from them. She was very grateful to Wen Shiqi and wanted to pull him out of the tragedy of the last life. From the previous conversation between Wen Shiqi and her, she knew that he must have suspected this matter, so he didn't mention anything about his cousin sister and his second brother. He only asked her why she knew about it. It could be seen that he already knew some facts. In this case, with Wen Shiqi's intelligence, it was impossible for him to be plotted against by those two people. Qin Wanru had already wiped away the blindness of family affection for him, so she didn't need to worry too much about it. Even though Wen Shiqi was sick in the last life, he still gave her the impression that he was extraordinarily intelligent. If he hadn't been sick, he would have had a place in those turbulent events in the last life. In this life, this was the only thing she could do. Moreover, Wen Shiqi still suspected her, so there was no need for her to have more contact with Wen Shiqi now. This was to prevent other accidents from happening. This was Qin Wanru's plan. That was why she turned around and left when Qi Rongji spoke. The purple bamboo forest was very large, and the stone tablets were scattered in the middle of the purple bamboo forest. The outermost part of the purple bamboo forest was surrounded by a wall, and the stone tablets were all inside the wall. The purple bamboo forest surrounded by the wall was very large. Qin Wanru had not walked out of the forest since she came here. The inner courtyard of the purple bamboo forest was very large, but there were very few people. Along the way, she only saw Wen Shiqi and Qi Rongji at the beginning. Qi Rongji could enter this forest because of Wen Shiqi, and Qin Wanru was brought here by Chu Luchen. Otherwise, she couldn't even enter the gate. The wind blew through the layers of bamboo leaves, and the purple bamboo patterns looked a little more simple and elegant behind the green leaves. After walking for a while, Qin Wanru left with Yujie before they reached the edge. When she came out, she didn't meet Wen Shiqi and Qi Rongji. She didn't know whether they went back or continued to walk in. The mountain roads were crisscrossed, and there was more than one way in and out, so it was normal not to meet them. On the way back, when she returned to her room, Qin Wanru was very tired. After washing up, she sat in front of the window and let Yujie wring her hair for her. She closed her eyes and rested in the chair lazily. After sitting for a while, she felt very quiet. When she looked up and saw that Yujie wanted to say something, she couldn't help but smile. "Do you have anything to say?" "Miss, Prince Chen is very dangerous," Yujie said uneasily when Qin Wanru asked. "I know, don't talk about him." Qin Wanru nodded and closed her eyes, not wanting to continue this topic. How could a person like Chu Luchen not be dangerous? What about Miss Qi? Yujie was a little anxious. As a servant girl, she couldn't say anything about Prince Chen, but Qi Rongji obviously had bad intentions. Just let her make trouble. Qin Wanru slightly raised the corner of her mouth and smiled indifferently. She should have sent one of her servant girls away, right? She was almost treated as a useless chess piece. Qi Rongji will not let it go. Is it Madame of Duke Xing and Madame D who join hands to frame you and Madame Dowager? Madame D's excuse is reasonable, but why does Madame of Duke Xing have to deal with you and Madame Dowager? Yujie asked in confusion. She had dried the handkerchief in her hand, and now she was combing Qin Wanru's slender hair with a comb. Her hair was thick, black, and soft. It made her face, which had no makeup on, look even more delicate and beautiful. Madame of Duke Xing, maybe she has a reason to deal with me. Qin Wanru's long eyelashes fluttered, and she slightly rolled her watery eyes, with her smile gradually turning cold. The hatred between her and Duke Xing's mansion was destined from the last life. Therefore, after entering the capital city, she had been careful, for fear that she would accidentally step into Madame of Duke Xing's trap. She had thought that with the previous plot, Madame of Duke Xing and Madame D would not hook up so quickly. Unexpectedly, she was wrong. Even in such a messy situation in Qin's mansion, Madame of Duke Xing could still manipulate Madame D and let her use Qi Rongji as a bait to deal with her. Madame of Duke Xing took out a plate before, and her purpose was also Qin Wanru, but she didn't know how she ruled out Qin Yuru. Even if the seal was related to Duke Xing's mansion, when the seal appeared on the clothes, there were 3 people. Why did Madame of Duke Xing believe that it was her? There must be one thing that she overlooked. What made her neglect it? Madame of Duke Xing immediately distinguished the difference between her and Qin Yuru. She wanted to deal with her, not Qin Yuru. What was the basis? Her beautiful eyebrows couldn't help but frown slightly. This was what she couldn't figure out now. Miss, why does Madame of Duke Xing want to deal with you? There is no grudge between you and her. Even if she wanted to deal with Master Hao before, you saved Master Hao and ruined her plan. She can't keep going against you, can she? Yu Jie said angrily in confusion. The people around Qin Wanru had already seen that Madame of Duke Xing wanted to deal with Qin Wanru. Right, why does she keep targeting me instead of Qin Yuru? Qin Wanru also couldn't figure it out and couldn't help muttering to herself. Who knows what she is thinking? If she wants to deal with people from General's mansion, First Miss should be the one to deal with. Is it because Madame of Duke Xing bullies the weak and fears the strong and dares not to bully First Miss, so she keeps plotting against Second Miss? Yu Jie thought for a while and said. A trace of coldness flashed in Qin Wanru's eyes. Madame of Duke Xing wanted to deal with her but not Qin Yuru. Of course, it was not because she bullies the weak and fears the strong. Ningyuan Army General's mansion might be regarded as a new noble, but its rank was not high and its foundation was not enough to compete with Duke Xing's mansion. If Madame of Duke Xing wanted to deal with someone, she would not consider this reason. Madame of Duke Xing wanted to deal with her and set her mind on her. She must have investigated her and Qin Yuru. There was one thing that was absolutely different between her and Qin Yuru. Moreover, she could tell at a glance that Qin Yuru was not the one she wanted to deal with. Then why did she set her mind on it? If she couldn't cut through the fog in front of her, she couldn't find the key point. For a moment, when facing Madame of Duke Xing, she seemed to be much more passive. However, Madame of Duke Xing stretched out one foot first, so she stepped on her foot first and then made plans. Chapter 241. In the afternoon of the next day, Madame Dowager left Huaguang Temple with a group of people and returned to Ningyuan Army General's mansion. It was very quiet at the gate of General's mansion, and there were no onlookers. But there were still people pointing at them from farther away, and they seemed to be discussing something. As soon as Qin Wanru got off the carriage, she saw Madame Di and Qin Huayong standing beside Madame Dowager. Both of them looked terrible. She stepped forward and saluted them calmly, and then retreated to the side. Zhuozhuo, go back first. Rulan, come with me. Madame Dowager said with a serious face. It was obvious that Qin Huayong and Madame Di had told her something before, and they didn't want Qin Wanru to be involved in it, so they sent Qin Wanru away first. Qin Wanru nodded and turned to leave. Suddenly, she turned to Qin Huayong and said, Father, how about the plate? It is a royal gift. If something happens to it, it will be troublesome. Qin Huayong's eyebrows jumped slightly, and he nodded casually with a smile on his face. His voice was also a little gentle. I have my own plan for it. Don't worry. Madame Di's face immediately became terrible, and even a little flustered. She glanced at Qin Wanru coldly, but she didn't say anything sensibly. In fact, this matter was not completely over. At this time, she and Madame of Duke Xing were both happy. However, she had wanted to find a chance to explain to Qin Huayong. Unexpectedly, Qin Wanru suddenly revealed it at this time, which caught her off guard. Qi Rongji was also observing Madame Di. She almost couldn't control the hatred in her eyes, but she still gritted her teeth and turned to leave with Qin Wanru. After walking for a while, Qi Rongji looked back and couldn't see Madame Dowager and others behind her. She took a few steps and stopped Qin Wanru. Sister Wanru, wait for me. I have a few words with you. Qin Wanru stood still and waited for her to come over. She asked indifferently, what's the matter? Sister Wanru, I'm sorry. I misunderstood you before. It must be Qin Yuru and Madame Di who did it on purpose. I'm here to apologize to you. Qi Rongji bowed deeply to Qin Wanru and looked to apologize sincerely. It doesn't matter. Qin Wanru said lightly and turned to leave. Qi Rongji didn't expect that her sincerity would be rewarded with such a frivolous reply. She almost couldn't keep the smile on her face, but she immediately said, Sister Wanru, I know you don't like third young Master Wen, and I'm short-sighted. But both of us are hurt by Qin Yuru and Madame D. Are you willing to accept it? So what? Qin Wanru narrowed her eyes and said indifferently. You are the second miss of the general's mansion and you are no worse than Qin Yuru. But she and Madame D can't tolerate you. They were like this when you were in Jiangzhou and they are still like this when you are in the capital city. How can you survive in the future? Even your marriage in the future will be in their hands. That is a matter of life. Qi Rongji said earnestly. She was very considerate of Qin Wanru. So, what should I do? Qin Wanru smiled, and her long eyelashes fluttered a few times, hiding a trace of coldness at the bottom of her eyes. Sister Wanru, I am also unwilling to accept it. Let's join hands. Qi Rongji's voice was very low, but it became more and more sincere. She gritted her teeth and said with hatred, I am unwilling to accept it. I almost lost my life, and even if I die, I can't find the culprit. How can I accept it? I have checked last night. Someone did something to my carriage, and one of the wheels is broken. If I hit it deliberately, there is a big possibility that something bad will happen. Qin Wanru was not surprised by this result. Since Madame D wanted something bad to happen to Qi Rongji, this was the best way. First, they made a mark on the wheel, and then when they went down the slope, they hit a big tree, the carriage fell apart, and then the horse crashed. In fact, it was not a difficult thing. I don't know what to do. You just be careful in the future. Qin Wanru said lightly. Someone is about to die, how can I be careful? Qin Wanru, you can't be so useless. Qi Rongji could not pretend anymore, and said angrily. What else can I do? This is the capital city, not Jiangzhou. Qin Wanru looked at Qi Rongji coldly and reminded her, in Jiangzhou, you may be able to rely on your father to fight against my father, but not here. She looked Qi Rongji up and down with some contempt in her eyes. Here, you can rely on no one. If you only rely on yourself, what can you do to Big Sister? If you can't even deal with Big Sister, how can you deal with Madame D? Qi Rongji, I advise you not to go out in the future, and don't stay alone. Maybe something bad will really happen. I am not worried about you, but I am afraid that if something bad happens, you will blame it on me. Qin Yuru is good at this kind of thing. After saying this, Qin Wanru did not wait for Qi Rongji to say anything, and turned to leave. Qin Wanru, Qin Wanru. Qi Rongji's exasperated voice came from behind. Qin Wanru did not look back, and just walked away with Yujie. Qi Rongji was so angry that her face turned blue. She kicked hard on the tree trunk beside her, gritted her teeth, and said with hatred, useless bitch, no wonder you have been bullied by Qin Yuru, you deserve to be bullied. Miss, we are now staying in General's mansion. If you really want to deal with us. I am afraid you really can't. Chun-Yi cautiously reminded her. She felt that what Qin Wanru said before was right. In this case, it was really not easy to directly deal with Qin Yuru and her daughter. No backing. Don't I still have my brother? My brother is Qin Yuru's weakness. Qin Yuru has a bad reputation now, so let's make it worse for her. Let's see if she still dares to plot against me. Qi Rongji had long been provoked by Qin Wanru. At this time, she felt that even her servant girl looked down on her. She was so angry that she turned back and gave Chun-Yi a slap and scolded. Yes, whatever Miss says is right. Chun-Yi covered her face and knelt down with a plop. Let's go back and see what my brother has to say. If he still covers up for this bitch, I will break off the brother-sister relationship with him, Qi Rongji said fiercely. She had already asked Chuanxi to bring her letter to Qi Tianyu, and that was to tell him about this matter, so that he could find a way to help her deal with Qin Yuru. At this point, she did not believe that her brother would still believe what Qin Yuru said. The matter between Qin Yuru and Di Yan had just ended. When the whole capital city was talking about this matter, some old stories about Qin Yuru began to spread out, talking about some things in Jiangzhou. It was said that when first Miss Qin was in Jiangzhou, she and Qi Tianyu, the son of the magistrate of the prefecture at that time, were in love. They were childhood sweethearts, and the two families had already formed an alliance. She promised Qi Tianyu to get married before he went to the capital city for the imperial examination. Unexpectedly, Madame D and Qin Yuru climbed up the high branch of Duke Yong's mansion and wanted to break off the engagement with Qi Tianyu. Moreover, they used second Miss Qin, who was not sensible, as a shield. For a time, this matter was in chaos in Jiangzhou, and it could be regarded as the biggest scandal in Jiangzhou. No one knew where this news came from, and it became more and more popular. It was said that some businessmen who transferred from Jiangzhou to the capital city to do business also talked about this matter, which made this matter more and more vivid. This matter, which had just faded a little before, immediately became a storm in the city because of this matter. Not only ordinary people in the capital city were talking about this matter, but also some aristocratic families were talking about this matter. Qin Wanru looked like a child. Although she was delicate, she was childish. No one would think that she really liked Qi Tianyu. Such a little child, what did she know? She was framed by Qin Yuru and her daughter. It was so hateful. Even a vicious stepmother was nothing more than this. As this news came out, another speculation came out silently. It was said that the reason why Madame D and Qin Yuru framed Qin Wanru was that she was not Qin Huayong's biological daughter, but picked up in the chaos of war. Although the rebellion had passed many years ago, many people still remembered it. Some of the past family affairs of Ningyuan army general's mansion were dug out. As it was dug out, the Yamen also caught an escaped slave. It was said that when he entered the capital city, he escaped from the team of Ningyuan army general's mansion. After being caught, he kept saying that it was Madame D who asked him to do it. The purpose was to kidnap second Miss Qin and sell her to that dirty place. The words of this escaped slave immediately stirred up the whole capital city. For the sake of the whole capital city, it was dug out that Shui rule and married into Qin's mansion. On the one hand, she was plotted against by Madame D. On the other hand, she wanted to take care of Qin Wanru, who had no parents. This was no longer just a rumor. It was simply appalling and unbelievable. But at this time, young Madame of Duke Yangxiu said that she was also in Jiangzhou at that time. She said that she was indeed there when this happened. So many news came one after another, like thunder in summer over the sky of Qin's mansion. The atmosphere in the whole sky was unprecedentedly tense. Qin Huayong and old grandma closed the door and discussed for a long time. They could not make up their minds. Finally, they put Madame D under house arrest and directly sent old maids to guard Yulan Pavilion where Madame D lived. Not to mention Madame D, even other people in the yard were not allowed to go in and out at will. They directly separated Madame D. Qin Yuru was also grounded and copied the rules for women in her yard. The matter of Qin's mansion was related to the inner court. Recently, all the people of Qin's mansion did not appear in front of the public. Even if there were curious people who wanted to ask, they could not. But Qi Tianyu was different. As the person involved, it was much more convenient to ask him. So some curious people went to ask Qi Tianyu if it was true. However, those who asked Qi Tianyu did not get a confirmed answer. Qi Tianyu always talked about other things. When it was really inevitable, he just said that the people of Qin's mansion had a good character. As for other things, he did not know. At this point, he still wholeheartedly defended the reputation of Qin's mansion. Everyone had a good opinion of this young Master Qi. Chapter 242. First Miss and Mei Shui really left from the back door. I don't know where they went at this time. Yu Jie was sent by Qin Wanru to keep an eye on Qin Yuru. Seeing Qin Yuru also dressed like a servant girl and secretly left Qin's mansion, she hurried to report to Qin Wanru. Qin Wanru was reading the medical book given by Mingqiu Nun. It was very quiet in the room. Hearing Yujie's words, she raised her head and shook it. Don't worry about her. It must be Qi Tianyu at this time. As she said, she slowly picked up the small scissors on one side and cut the jumping candle. A long section of the candle was cut off, and the unstable flame immediately calmed down. She went to ask the first young master of the Qi family to prove that what happened before was a lie. Miss, what should we do? The first young master of the Qi family will definitely help first miss. Yujie was anxious when she heard it. She knew the influence of first miss on the first young master of the Qi family. Qi Tianyu won't help her. Qin Wanru smiled. Her beautiful hair had been combed again. She took off the two buns and only made a braid, hanging it on one side, which made her look more charming and beautiful. Why not? Before Qin Yu. Just tell me that when we were in Jiangzhou, the first young master of the Qi family once made trouble for second miss in order to help first miss. Yujie said. Qin Wanru squinted her watery eyes and looked at the candle on the candlestick. A faint smile appeared on her beautiful lips. Today is different from the past. It was caused by Qi Tianyu. How could he slap his own face? It was caused by the first young master of the Qi family. Yujie was startled. The whole mansion seemed to be in a mess in the past 2 days, and the atmosphere in the mansion was also very depressed. Everyone knew that this kind of thing was so systematic that it would not be solved easily. However, people in the mansion guessed that the cause of this matter was related to Shui Rulin and Qin Wanru. Unexpectedly, it was caused by Qi Tianyu. Qi Rongji suffered such a big loss. How could she be willing to give up? She must seek help from Qi Tianyu. Qin Wanru said slowly. Doesn't the first young master of the Qi family believe in first miss's words the most? Yujie was puzzled. She actually didn't know much about what had happened back then. She only knew most of it from Qingyue. Times have changed. If Qi Tianyu still can't figure it out at this time, he is really stupid. Qin Wanru's smile gradually became cold. She never thought that Qi Tianyu was stupid, otherwise he would not have been the third in the examination. She even thought that Qi Tianyu was not as affectionate as he showed. Some of the things that came out this time were expected, and some were unexpected, but the result was good. The rumor was spread by someone sent by Qi Tianyu, but Qin Wanru asked Chu Luchen to release the coachman. As for asking the coachman to tell the truth, it was not difficult for Chu Luchen at all. The young madam of Duke Yangxiu's righteous words surprised Qin Wanru a little. Qin Wanru thought that even if the young madam of Duke Yangxiu's 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 young madam of Duke, of course, the effect was better at this time, but it was easy to bring the young madam of Duke Yangxiu to the teeth of the storm. Qin Wanru was very grateful for the reaction of the young madam of Duke Yangxiu. Originally, she wanted to release the coachman after the young madam of Duke Yangxiu had a look at him at a specific moment. But now it was a better opportunity. After pushing forward step by step, she could spread the things in Jiangzhou at that time and confirm part of it. For some rumors, because one part of it was verified, it made people believe in the other parts without a doubt. Qin Wanru had this effect long ago. At that time, there were many families of businessmen who traveled in Jingxin Monastery. In the past, no one talked about it, so these people naturally didn't dare to talk about it. But now, since everyone was talking about it, these people also became witnesses. What they saw and heard would no longer be concealed. Naturally, the more people talked about this rumor, the more they felt it was true. If the first young master of the Qi family doesn't intervene, what about Duke Yang's mansion? Yujie was relieved, but suddenly thought of Duke Yang's mansion and said. Qin Wanru didn't speak this time. She smiled slightly and meaningfully. Duke Yang's mansion couldn't do anything. Duke Yong arrived at Ningyuan Army General's mansion the next day. After Qin Huayong welcomed him into the study, they sat down according to the host and the guest. As soon as he sat down, Duke Yong's face turned cold. He slammed his hand on the table and said to Qin Huayong with a gloomy face, "Brother-in-law, what do you mean by locking my sister up? Do you want to favor your concubine to the detriment of your wife?" Qin Huayong was given the title of favor your concubine to the detriment of your wife. Qin Huayong had no foundation in the capital city. If he really got such a title, his career would probably be blocked. "Brother-in-law, what do you mean?" Qin Huayong said unhurriedly. "What do you mean by locking my sister up? Do you think our Duke Yong's mansion is dead? How could you lock my sister up because of some hearsay?" Duke Yong came here today to stand up for Madame D. He was very imposing. He didn't believe that Qin Huayong dared to really offend him. "Brother-in-law, don't you know the rumors outside?" Qin Huayong asked in a cold voice. He didn't like so many rumors outside, but since it happened, he must make the smallest sacrifice to calm the situation. "The rumors outside must be spread by people in your mansion. You can check Madame Shui and your second daughter in your mansion. They must be jealous of my sister and Yuru, so they spread such rumors. Brother-in-law, I don't mean to criticize you, but how can you sweep the world if you don't sweep the house? You are a general in vain." Duke Yong sneered. "It's not them," Qin Huayong said with certainty. "Brother-in-law, you won't cover up for them, will you? If it's not them, who else can it be? Look at what they have done. Is it human? If my sister is not good, will your mansion be good?" Duke Yong's eyes were about to spurt fire. "It's them who should be grounded. As long as you ground them, this matter will be peaceful." When the news came out, they were still in Huaguang Temple and didn't do anything. "It's not them. They can't meddle in the matter of the coachman. They don't have such great ability," Qin Huayong said. "It happened suddenly." Of course, he also suspected that Shui Rulan and Qin Wanru had done it. But after checking, he found that it had nothing to do with them. "Qin Huayong, what do you mean now? Do you really want to imprison my sister for a lifetime?" Duke Yong was unhappy and looked at Qin Huayong with sharp eyes. "What else can I do except this? Do you still want Yuru to bear this matter?" Qin Huayong turned a blind eye to the anger on Duke Yong's face and said coldly. Duke Yong was not the only one who was badly battered. Many things were caused by Madame D. How could he not be angry? At this time, he suppressed the anger in his heart and talked to Duke Yong. Until now, he didn't want to fall out with Duke Yong. It was not good for him or Duke Yong. Yuru is just a child. If she bears the responsibility. Duke Yong saw that he couldn't overwhelm Qin Huayong in terms of momentum, so he rolled his eyes and slowed down his voice. Before coming here, Countess Yong told him another possibility. Although he didn't agree with it, he also thought it was feasible at this time. "No. Brother-in-law, you don't like Yuru?" Before he finished his words, Qin Huayong's face had become fierce. He already knew what Duke Yong was going to say. "Yuru is young after all. With my sister's help, she will be fine." Duke Yong hurriedly explained in a panic. "Put the blame on Yuru, and then Di Yan will break the engagement with Yuru because of this." "Brother-in-law, is this your idea?" Qin Huayong smiled coldly. Although he didn't like Di Yan, he also knew that Di Yan was Qin Yuru's best choice at this time. On this point, his idea was the same as Madame D's. How can you think so? I also want to solve the current predicament." Duke Yong stammered. Then he straightened his chest and said loudly, trying to show his selflessness. In fact, this was Countess Yong's idea. Before coming here, they had discussed it. Countess Yong repeatedly said that with Qin Yuru's reputation, marrying her would harm Di Yan. At this time, they should break the engagement in the chaos and marry a virtuous girl from a famous family for Di Yan, which could guide Di Yan to the right path instead of making his reputation worse. Duke Yong didn't agree at first because Di Yan was his sister and the sister he loved the most. However, Countess Yong kept talking about Di Yan's future, so he was a little persuaded. Although he didn't agree with Countess Yong at that time, he also said that he would act according to the circumstances. At this time, he changed his mind and had this idea, which became stronger and stronger. His son couldn't really be influenced by Qin Yuru. At that time, not only would he achieve nothing, but his reputation would be worse. The engagement is still valid, and it can't be broken. Qin Huayong said in an unquestionable tone. Brother-in-law, this marriage was originally appropriate. Yan grew up with Kai Xian, and they indeed had affection for each other for a long time. Yan originally wanted to marry Ning Kai Xian, but my mother insisted that Yan marry Yuru, so this matter was suppressed. However, Yan has always had Ning Kai Xian in his heart. This time, Ning Kai Xian was forced to die by Yuru. In fact, it is not impossible for them to be together by force. Brother-in-law, are you determined to break the engagement? Qin Huayong's face became more and more gloomy. This is also for their own good. We can't let them become a pair of resentful couple. In the future, they won't be happy. If Ning Kai Xian didn't die, maybe they could still be together. But now Ning Kai Xian is dead. The dead are the most important, and if she becomes the eternal white moonlight in Yan's heart, Yuru marrying him. I'm afraid. After the engagement is broken, we will still be relatives, and I will help Yuru find a better marriage in the future. Duke Yong said hypocritically, pretending to be considerate of Duke Yong's mansion. He used both the carrot and the stick, and he didn't believe that they could still break the engagement. They couldn't break the engagement. Chapter 243. Duke Yong's face changed dramatically as if he was facing a formidable enemy. Didn't he say that the problem had been solved? First brother-in-law, many servants have seen the plate bestowed by the emperor and heard a lot of words before. Until now, you haven't given me an explanation as to why the plate appeared in our mansion. It is said to be a betrothal gift, but it is not on the list of betrothal gifts, and there is a crack left a long time ago on the plate. There is a crack on the plate. Qin Huayong said word by word. His eyes were deep and sharp, and a gust of coldness came to his face. Even if it was really a misunderstanding, the cracked plate was already a crime. The emperor's gift was recorded, and it belonged to whoever it belonged to. What was more, Duke Xing's mansion was involved in it. Duke Yong dared not and could not afford to take the risk. Then what should we do now? Speaking of this, Duke Yong felt guilty and had to soften his tone, not daring to mention breaking off the engagement. Madame D caused the trouble, so she should be locked up. As for other things, Madame D is also the mastermind. Qin Huayong said in a low voice. When Madame D was locked up, he had already thought it through. The only way to minimize the loss was to put all the blame on Madame D. Suddenly, he remembered what Qin Wanru said to him before. It should be time to ask for a title for Shui Rulan. The rumor was not good for Madame D, but it was good for Shui Rulan. Now it was Shui Rulan who was in charge of the inner court, and he had promised Qin Wanru that he would ask for a title for Shui Rulan at the right time. Now it was the best opportunity, and he could also let people see that everyone in Qin's mansion was good except for Madame D. No, my sister is ruined. Even if Duke Yong was held hostage by Qin Huayong, he couldn't control his anger at this time. Madame D is just locked up. It is not ruined. Let's talk about it after this thing is over. There is still a chance to get out. Qin Huayong said lightly. How long will it be? Duke Yong said unhappily. Of course it's because there's no news about it. The sooner the better. Qin Huayong raised the corner of his mouth. Of course, he would not tell Duke Yong that he did not intend to release Madame D. Not only did he not intend to, but he also wanted to transfer Madame D's title to Shui Rulan. Compared with Shui Rulan, who was pregnant but still managed the family affairs, Qin Huayong really did not like Madame D, who almost implicated the whole Qin's mansion. Although he would not really hurt Madame D for the sake of Qin Yuru, he did not intend to let this matter go. when will there be no news? Now that this matter has become the talk of the town, not only will there be rumors about it, but it will also spread to you. Are you really not worried at all? Duke Yong said with a sullen face. He was anxious, very anxious, not for Qin Huayong, but for himself. Madame D was born in Duke Yong's mansion. Let's suppress this matter secretly. With two people working together, the result should be faster. Qin Huayong knew what Duke Yong was worried about, so he did not expose him. He comforted him and then added lightly, "What if we don't do this?" His words made Duke Yong speechless. In this situation, they could only try to suppress the rumors first. Otherwise, whatever they said would be wrong. Okay, let's do this. But don't forget that she is my sister. If she really has an accident, my mother will do anything. Duke Yong stood up, gritted his teeth, and threatened Qin Huayong, saying that if Qin Huayong really did harm to Madame D, Duke Yong would fight with him to the death. Rest assured, Yuru still has to marry into Duke Yong's mansion. Qin Huayong stood up to see him off. His words comforted Duke Yong. With a sullen face and a cold snort, he did not say anything, turned around, and left. Today, he came to Ningyuan Army General's mansion without achieving any of his goals. Thinking of it, he felt very aggrieved. Qin Huayong stood in the hall and did not see him out. He just looked at his back with an ambiguous look. What happened next became more and more confusing. First, an imperial censor accused Qin Huayong of not disciplining his wife strictly, saying that such a woman could not have the title of honorary lady. The Ministry of Justice had the testimony of the coachman, but it was a little troublesome to interrogate Madame D, so this matter was also presented. No matter what Madame D did, she was still a madam with the title of honorary lady. How could she be brought to court so casually? So this matter was related to Madame D's title of honorary lady. For a moment, everyone thought that Madame D should not be a madam with the title of honorary lady. At this time, Qin Huayong knelt at the gate of the palace and asked for the accusation of not disciplining his wife strictly. He also said that Madame D was not idle and should be stripped of the title of honorary lady. But Madame Shui, who wholeheartedly protected his second daughter, was a quiet and dignified woman and should receive the title of honorary lady. He asked the emperor to transfer Madame D's title of honorary lady to Madame Shui. It could be said that he had never seen or heard of such a thing before. Qin Huayong knelt at the gate of the palace. The emperor in the palace did not send a message for a long time, so he continued to kneel at the gate of the palace. This matter caused a sensation from the people to the palace and the whole court. Some people thought that even if Madame D did not have the title of honorary lady, she should not be given to Madame Shui. Madame Shui was only a secondary wife. How could she have a higher position than the legal wife? But some people thought it was reasonable. The female mistress of Ningyuan Army General's mansion should have the title of honorary lady. Otherwise, there was no way to convince the public. Since the legal wife could not be the legal wife, naturally the secondary wife should be. A secondary wife was also a wife. Outside the palace, Qin Huayong continued to kneel at the gate of the palace. He had been kneeling at the gate of the palace for 2 hours. Until now, no one came to ask him to go in. So he lowered his head and kept kneeling respectfully. Who is this? Why are you kneeling here? Did something happen? Suddenly, a voice as gentle as jade came into the silence, followed by the sound of wheels turning. Qin Huayong raised his eyes and looked excitedly at the handsome young man sitting in the wheelchair. Chu Luchen, who was facing the light, looked as elegant as jade. It could be said that he was floating like an immortal. Only the wheelchair seemed to pull him from the immortal state to the mortal world. Your Highness, this is Ningyuan Army General. He is asking for the title of honorary lady for his secondary wife. The little eunuch who was asked lowered his head and answered respectfully. Asking for the title of honorary lady for his secondary wife? What a loyal and affectionate man. If you really do such a thing for the people you care about, it is really a pity. Chu Liuchen's eyes fell on Qin Huayong's face and praised him lightly. Your Highness. Qin Huayong also calmed down at this time. He kowtowed to Chu Luchen respectfully on the ground and made a big bow. No need. Chu Luchen waved his hand casually and said, "Doesn't my uncle have time to see you? The emperor is busy. My business is trivial." Qin Huayong lowered his head and said, "Trivial? It's just a woman's business, right? Uncle is really busy with important things." After Chu Luchen finished speaking, he slightly raised the corner of his mouth and said gently. Xiao Xuanzi turned his wheelchair and continued to push Chu Luchen to other places. All this seemed to be just a chance encounter. But someone immediately reported it to the emperor. After a while, a eunuch ordered someone to call Qin Huayong in. Qin Wanru had guessed that Qin Huayong went to kneel at the palace gate. Seeing that Qin Huayong was not back when he was supposed to return to the mansion, Madame Dowager and Shui Rulan were anxious and sent people to wait at the Chuehua gate, including Qin Wanru. But they waited until the afternoon. Because Qin Huayong did not come back, all the masters in the mansion were not in the mood for lunch and were all anxious. Shui Rulan then went to Madame Dowager's place. After knowing the news, Qin Wanru also went to Madame Dowager's Xining pavilion to talk with them. But when they said the funny things in the past, Madame Dowager just forced a smile and Shui Rulan was even more listless. Finally, an old maid came to report that Qin Huayong was back, and the room immediately became lively and joyful. When Qin Huayong strode in, Madame Dowager's eyes fell on him excitedly. Finding that he was fine except for a pale face, she breathed a sigh of relief and sat down again. Shui Rulan hurriedly asked someone to make Qin Huayong's favorite tea. She wanted to help Qin Huayong regardless of her big belly, but was stopped by Qin Huayong. He helped her sit down in a chair on the side and then bowed to Madame Dowager. "Sit down. Are you all right?" Madame Dowager asked Qin Huayong to sit down and said anxiously. She was really worried that Qin Huayong was the only backbone in this family full of women. If something really happened to him, the whole Qin's mansion would be finished. Qin Huayong sat down in a chair, picked up the teacup served by a servant girl and took a sip. After a while, he smiled to Madame Dowager and said, "Mother, I'm fine." "How could you be so bold? Didn't I tell you before that this matter was not urgent? If something really happened to you, what would Rulan, Zhuozhua and I do?" Madame Dowager also calmed down a little at this time and blamed him. "Mother, our Ningyuan Army General's mansion also needs a madam to entertain," Qin Huayong said calmly. There was no hope for Madame D. If he didn't get the honorary title for Shui Rulan at this time, Shui Rulan might not have a chance for a long time. After all, it depended on Qin Huayong's fate to apply for a title. If there was no chance to apply for a title or a chance to make meritorious service, Shui Rulan's title of honorary lady would be far away. Moreover, when the family members of Ningyuan Army General's mansion attended the banquet, they would be looked down upon by others, and it would even affect Qin Wanru's marriage. It didn't matter whether Madame D's honorary title was removed or not. What was important was that Shui Rulan had the honorary title. Many families had already taken a fancy to an 11-year-old girl. Madame Dowager understood this. She sighed deeply and shook her head helplessly. "What's the result now?" "The Ministry of Rights will review it again." Qin Huayong smiled. In his opinion, since the emperor had given in, it was not a big deal in other places. It would happen sooner or later. As for Madame D's honorary title, the emperor also wanted to put it aside first. After all, Madame D was the legal wife and Duke Yong's sister. In addition, it seemed that someone had put in a good word for Madame D. The emperor wanted to put it aside after the investigation, but he didn't mention the matter of the coachman's interrogation again. Qin Huayong understood the meaning of this, so he didn't mention Madame D anymore. Hearing his words, Madame Dowager also breathed a sigh of relief. But after thinking for a while, she hesitated. Duke Yong's mansion won't agree. If they really make trouble, what about Yuru's marriage? It's Madame D who brought this trouble upon herself. Duke Yong's mansion should also know that it has become like this. We also have no choice. For Yuru's good, we have to do this. When Yuru gets married, there must be a mother to control the situation. Qin Huayong said in a low voice. Qin Wanru had been standing quietly on one side. She turned her eyes away from Qin Huayong's face calmly. Her eyes moved slightly and rippled a little. Chapter 244. Madam of Duke Xing wants to see me. Madame Dowager was stunned and sat up straight. After she came to the capital city, she had been living in seclusion and had never met any guests. She didn't know what Madam of Duke Xing, whom she had never met, meant. Although she had been here once before, she had met Madame D and had nothing to do with her. Yes, she said it was because of Wanru's help to the young master of Duke Xing's mansion. I came here in a hurry last time and didn't bring any gifts, so I didn't see you. Qin Huayong glanced at Qin Wanru beside him and said. This explained why she only saw Madame D and not Madame Dowager when she came to Qin's mansion last time. It's not good to come here at this time when the mansion is in such a mess, right? Madame Dowager hesitated and said. Madame of Duke Xing said it was okay and she should come here at this time. Qin Huayong said. Should come here. Qin Wanru sneered in her heart. Madame D was restricted in the courtyard, and Madame of Duke Xing couldn't reach out her hands. This time she would come here in person. Madame of Duke Xing is really a person who is affectionate and righteous. Madame Dowager sighed. Qin's mansion was in the teeth of the storm now, and no discerning person was willing to get involved at this time. The fact that Madame of Duke Xing could come to visit her at this time meant that she supported Qin's mansion in a way. How could Madame Dowager not be moved? Even Shui Rulan, who was sitting aside, nodded repeatedly. She had a good impression of Madame of Duke Xing before she met her. Qin Wanru lowered her head slightly, and her eyes fell on the delicate carvings on the corner of the chair. A trace of coldness flashed in her eyes. Madame of Duke Xing really didn't forget to leave a good impression at any time. At this time, even Grandma and Mother might think that she was really amiable and respectable, but they didn't know that she was the one who stabbed them in the back. Madame of Duke Xing came to Ningyuan Army General's mansion the next day, and she brought a lot of gifts with her. She gave gifts to every master in Ningyuan Army General's mansion. Even Qi Rongji, who lived as a guest, received a few pieces of cloth and a few pieces of jewelry. After Qi Rongji was overjoyed, she also went to Madame Dowager's courtyard with Chuni to thank Madame of Duke Xing. Qin Wanru came late. When she arrived at Madame Dowager's courtyard, she had already heard the laughter. She immediately lifted her skirt and walked in slowly, followed by Nanny Zheng. This time, she didn't bring Qing Yu or Yuru, but only Nanny Zheng. Inside the room, old grandma was sitting in the main seat with a smile on her face. She was wearing a dark cyan robe with the word Fu on it and a dark cyan forehead cloth with a big red gem in it. She looked very energetic. Shui Rulan was sitting on her right side. Madame of Duke Xing was sitting in the guest seat, and Qi Rongji was sitting beside her. They were talking happily. Seeing Qin Wanru come in, Madame of Duke Xing looked her up and down and said with a smile, I haven't seen second Miss Qin for a long time, but you are getting more and more beautiful. Madame Dowager is so lucky. Madoff Daof of Madoff Ru. With Madoff Mad Madam. Madam of Mad Qin. Qin Wanru stepped forward and bowed deeply to Madame of Duke Xing. When she just got up, her hand was held by Madame of Duke Xing. Madame of Duke Xing seemed to like Qin Wanru very much. It would be great to have a daughter like second Miss Qin. Madame Dowager, what do you think of the previous proposal? She said and looked at Madame Dowager. Qin Wanru's heart suddenly jumped. She immediately realized that it was not good. She calmly pushed away Madame of Duke Xing's hand and bowed to Madame Dowager and Shui Rulan. I really appreciate Madame's kindness, but I have to tell Zhuozhua about it. Madame Dowager said with a smile. Her eyes fell on Qin Wanru, full of appreciation. This child is really pitiful. Who could have thought that there would be such a thing? Her nickname is Zhuozhuo. Madame of Duke Xing's face showed a trace of strangeness, but it immediately flashed away. If Qin Wanru had not been paying attention to her, she really would not have found this trace of strangeness. Did her nickname, which only Grandma called her, remind her of something? That's right. This child does have a hard life. Madame Dowager sighed more and more. Looking at Qin Wanru's obedient and docile look, she only felt bitter in her heart. At such a young age, she became an orphan without parents. How could she not be pitiful? The most hateful thing was that Madame D was not virtuous. She had promised that she would treat Zhuozhuo as her biological daughter, but in fact, she had been making trouble for Zhuozhuo. I only have one daughter, and she likes to lecture. She is not around at ordinary times. I really want to have such a lovely daughter by my side. When I saw second Miss Qin before, I liked her very much, but I didn't dare to be presumptuous. When I came to your mansion last time, I wanted to ask Madame D's opinion. I thought Madame D was second Miss Qin's mother, but I didn't expect that I made a mistake. Speaking of this, Madame of Duke Xing smiled at Shui Rulin with modesty. Shui Rulin smiled softly. She did have some doubts about this matter, but now she felt that what Madame of Duke Xing said was reasonable. Everyone in the capital knew that Madame D was her cousin's legal wife, but no one knew who she was. It was reasonable that Madame of Duke Xing came to visit Madame D. Come on, take out the gift I prepared for second Miss Qin. Madame of Duke Xing said to an old maid behind her with a smile. The old maid nodded, and two servant girls came forward and presented the brocade box in their hands. How can I accept it? Madame of Duke Xing has sent a gift just now. Madame Dowager waved her hand repeatedly. After Madame of Duke Xing entered the mansion, she sent a gift. Qin Wanru's gift had also been sent to Zhifang Pavilion. It was because of this gift that Qin Wanru hurriedly came to express her gratitude to Madame of Duke Xing. Madame of Duke Xing gave another gift. Although Qin Wanru showed a very embarrassed look, she took 2 steps back and was too embarrassed to take it. But her eyes became colder and even a little bit hostile. The clothes given to her before could not be worn casually, but at this time, Madame of Duke Xing gave her a gift again. She was almost sure that Madame of Duke Xing really had other plans for her this time. She stole a glance at Madame Dowager and Shui Rulin. Both of them looked very happy. Obviously, they were fascinated by Madame of Duke Xing's performance. But she didn't know what kind of vicious thoughts this person had on the surface. With a gentle smile. Seeing Madame of Duke Xing, she thought of the scene when she forced her grandmother to kneel down to apologize in the last life. That kind of humiliation was deeply rooted in her heart and almost dug her heart. In this life, the situation had changed, and Madame of Duke Xing's attitude had also changed. She actually showed a look of wanting to make friends with Qin's mansion, and it seemed that she also wanted to make a move on Qin's mansion from other aspects. The past is the past, and the present is the present. It is my kind intention. I really like second Miss Qin so much. Madame of Duke Xing looked at Qin Wanru lovingly, and her smile became more and more gentle. She stood up, walked in front of the servant girl, and reached out to open a brocade box. A set of head ornaments in it immediately made Qi Rongji jealous and hate, and she almost stared at it. The pearl that was the size of a longan was the most valuable. It was mounted on a gold and jade hairpin, and there were more than a dozen small pearls on the side. Not only was the craftsmanship exquisite, but its value was also immeasurable. It was really a big gift. The value of this hairpin was the sum of the previous gifts, not to mention that there was such a set of matching jewelry and head ornaments. I newly made this hairpin with the most precious pearl in my dowry. Today I will give it to second Miss Qin. I hope Madame Dowager and Madame Shui will be satisfied. Seeing everyone's shocked look, Madame of Duke Xing proudly picked up the hairpin and twirled it, and then opened the second brocade box. There was a pair of jade bracelets. The jade bracelets were crystal clear, which made people happy at first glance. Qi Rongji had seen a lot of jade bracelets, but none of them could compare with this pair. Her heart beat faster and faster. She liked it very much. This pair of bracelets is also my new one. Now I will also give them to second Miss Qin. Madam of Duke Xing said with a smile. Madam, how can I accept it? How dare I accept such valuable things from you? Seeing Madam of Duke Xing looking at her, Qin Wanru took a step back and refused softly. If I accept such valuable things from you, what will others think? They will definitely think that our Qin's mansion is holding you back for your kindness. This is really not good. We appreciate Madam of Duke Xing's kindness, but this gift is indeed too generous for us to accept. Madam Dowager also waved her hand repeatedly. Old Madam, if you agree to my proposal, it's not a big deal. It's just a greeting gift from an elder to a younger one. Moreover, if our two families get closer, our Marquis can also help Ning Yuan Army General deal with some things. Otherwise, we won't have a good reason to send troops. Even if we want to help, we can't. Madam of Duke Xing said with a smile. She was not angry because of Qin Wanru's refusal, and her smile became more amiable. After speaking to Madam Dowager, she turned to Qin Wanru and said, Second Miss, don't be in a hurry to refuse. I really like Second Miss, and I also want to have a junior like Second Mississippi. If Second Miss becomes my junior in the future, it is inevitable that our mansion will send you a dowry in the future. He expressed that he would support Qin Huayong, expressed that he really liked Qin Wanru, and said that he would help her choose her marriage and even send her a dowry. It was really hard to find such a good deal. Duke Xing's power in the capital city was far beyond that of ordinary noble families. Madam Dowager looked at Shui Rulan awkwardly, and Shui Rulan was also very hesitant. She turned her eyes to Qin Wanru, but it was inconvenient to ask Qin Wanru directly in front of everyone. For a moment, the room was quiet. Madam Dowager, before I came here, I also reported this matter to Old Madam of our mansion. Old Madam also said that she likes Second Miss Qin very much. If possible, we can also ask the Queen in the palace to correct Second Miss Qin's name. Of course, next, she can also live with the Miss of our Duke Xing's mansion and be raised under the name of our Old Madam for a period of time. Seeing that they were interested, Madam of Duke Xing immediately smiled more affectionately. She did not believe that this could not make them agree. Chapter 245. Grandma, what are you talking about? Why can't I understand? Qin Wanru looked at Madam Dowager in astonishment and then looked at Madam of Duke Xing. She looked confused at first and then surprised. Have you found my mother? Where is she? Is she okay? Is she really in the capital city? No wonder Ruyan Great Elder Princess. Speaking of this, Qin Wanru seemed to feel that she had spilled the beans and hurriedly stopped talking. What did Ruyan Great Elder Princess say? Madam of Duke Xing's face changed uncontrollably and said anxiously. After saying that, she also found that she was too hasty. She hurriedly smiled at Madam Dowager and said, Madam Dowager, I'm afraid that you don't know the relationship between our mansion and Ruyan Great Elder Princess. Because of what happened to my sister-in-law, Ruyan Great Elder Princess has always disliked our mansion. I'm afraid that I have offended Ruyan Great Elder Princess again. Hearing what she said, Madam Dowager also looked at Qin Wanru with concern. Madam Dowager was not clear about the resentment between Duke Xing's mansion and Ruyan Great Elder Princess's mansion, but looking at Madam of Duke Xing's expression, she knew that there must be something behind it. This. Qin Wanru hesitated. Second Miss Qin, what did Ruyan Great Elder Princess say? Please tell me. I know that I am too insignificant in front of Ruyan Great Elder Princess, so I dare not speculate in vain. Madam of Duke Xing said with a wry smile. What Ruyan Great Elder Princess said before seems to be related to my mother. Qin Wanru said hesitantly. It seemed that she didn't want to say it, but now she had to say it. But Ruyan Great Elder Princess asked me to wait. I'm not very clear about the details. Qin Wanru lowered her head and pinched the handkerchief in her hand. Is there really news about your mother? Madame Dowager was overjoyed and looked at Qin Wanru excitedly. For a moment, she forgot the matter about Madame of Duke Xing. Ruyan Great Elder Princess seems to mean it. Now it is still being investigated, so I don't know whether it is true. Qin Wanru made an excuse about Ruyan Great Elder Princess. Now she had basically understood what Madame of Duke Xing meant. In the last life, Qin Yuru was raised in Duke Xing's mansion. It was said that old Madame liked her very much. After that, she doted on Qin Yuru even more and even kept her for a few more years before letting her get married. After getting married, with Duke Xing's mansion as her background, all the noble ladies in the capital city dared not look down on her. Now, it seemed like this matter was going to fall on her head, but she didn't like it. What tricks did Madame of Duke Xing want to play again? She coerced Madame Dowager to agree with this matter. In addition, Madame Dowager had said that she liked Qin Wanru and her daughter. Madame Dowager intended to recognize Qin Wanru as her adopted daughter. With the power of Duke Xing's mansion, if they recognized her as their adopted daughter, it would be reasonable for them to intervene in her marriage. Madame Dowager and Shui Rulan both regarded her as a good person. In addition, she was used to whitewashing her performance. At that time, it might be difficult for her to control them. The only thing he could do now was to stop her. Or... She quietly turned her eyes to Qi Rongji, who was watching on the side with jealousy and hatred. She slightly raised the corners of her mouth, showing an invisible sneer. Rui, and Great Elder Princess wants to find your biological mother for you? Although Madame of Duke Xing was smiling, it looked a little stiff and less lively than before. It should be this way. Qin Wanru replied softly. Madame Dowager, who is second Miss Qin's biological mother? Madame of Duke Xing suddenly turned to Madame Dowager and asked, which stunned Madame Dowager. Things like this were basically secrets. Although Madame of Duke Xing expressed her love for Qin Wanru and wanted to recognize Qin Wanru as her adopted daughter, it was not now. At this time, it was actually very impolite to ask this matter as if it was a family member. As a noble madam of an aristocratic family, it was impossible for Madame of Duke Xing to not know it. But she just asked in this way, so Madame Dowager didn't know how to answer for a moment. Grandma, you haven't told me about my biological mother yet. You haven't told me before. Qin Wanru raised her watery eyes and looked at old Madame Qin aggrievedly with sadness in her eyes. This made old Madame Qin feel more and more difficult to explain. Seeing Madame Dowager's look, Shui Rulan also knew that she was in a dilemma. She immediately smiled and said to help, Wanru, don't worry. When your grandma is free, I will tell you about your biological mother. Of course, she didn't want to say it here. After all, it was also a secret, and not anyone could hear it. Thank you, Grandma. Qin Wanru bowed, then stood up with red eyes and retreated to Qi Rongji's side. Now there were only 2 unmarried girls in this room, so it was normal for them to come together. Madame Dowager, have you met second Miss Qin's biological mother? Madame of Duke Xing was very anxious. Although she still had an easygoing smile on her face, her words became more and more impolite. Just now Shui Rulan had said that this kind of thing should be told to Qin Wanru first, but now Madame of Duke Xing showed great interest. This made Madame Dowager a little unhappy. At this time, Madame of Duke Xing shouldn't ask so carefully, and she kept asking, which made Madame Dowager's heart move. Madam, of course I have met her. As a member of our mansion, how can I not know her? Madame Dowager said lightly. Madame Dowager, can you tell me about second Miss Qin's biological mother? The woman who can give birth to such a smart and beautiful girl as second Miss Qin must be an outstanding woman. Madame of Duke Xing seemed to be more and more interested, and her words became more and more impolite. After saying that, she also felt a little bad, looked at Qin Wanru guiltily and said, I really like this child. This thing is really a long story, and it is not convenient to tell Madam here. Madame Dowager coughed in a low voice to hide the displeasure in her eyes. She did have a good impression of Madame of Duke Xing, but Madame of Duke Xing repeatedly asked about Qin Wanru's biological mother, which made her a little unhappy. If this kind of thing could be said, why didn't she tell Zhuozhuo clearly until now? Madame of Duke Xing expressed her love for Zhuozhuo, but now in Madame Dowager's eyes, she was just an outsider. Is Madame of Duke Xing here to recognize her daughter today? Standing beside Qi Rongji, Qin Wanru lowered her voice and asked curiously. Qi Rongji came earlier than her and heard more than her, so she should know. Yes. Qi Rongji glared at Qin Wanru and also lowered her voice. How could Qin Wanru be so lucky to be chosen by Madame of Duke Xing? What a pity. Qin Wanru sighed in a low voice. What do you mean? Qi Rongji almost pricked up her ears. Madame of Duke Xing means that she wants a well-behaved and obedient daughter, and she will be raised by old Madame of Duke Xing's mansion. But I am afraid I can't, and Rui, and great elder princess. Qin Wanru said hesitantly in a low voice, and turned to look at the box in the hands of two servant girls, looking very covetous. Who wouldn't like such a beautiful pearl headpiece and that pair of bracelets? It's a pity that big sister is not here, otherwise I can let big sister ask for it herself. Qin Wanru sighed again. Qi Rongji's eyes suddenly lit up, and she couldn't help but breathe a little faster. She looked at Madame of Duke Xing, and then looked at the box in the hands of two servant girls, and clenched the handkerchief in her hand more tightly. If Qin Yuru could do it, why couldn't she? She could also be a well-behaved and obedient adopted daughter. Thinking of the meaning in this, how could Qi Rongji not be tempted? This was a good opportunity, Madame Dowager, what about the thing before? I really want such a well-behaved and obedient daughter. Madame of Duke Xing also knew that she was a little too eager, so she hurriedly hid the anxiety in the bottom of her eyes and changed the topic again. This. Hearing this, Madame Dowager hesitated and turned her eyes to Qin Wanru. Seeing that Qin Wanru shook her head calmly, she became more and more uncertain in her heart. She had seen Qin Wanru's performance these days. Although this granddaughter was young, she was knowledgeable. Since she said that she was unwilling, there must be a reason. Although she still thought Madame of Duke Xing was very good and it would be of great help to Qin Wanru to recognize Madame of Duke Xing as her adopted mother, of course, it was inconvenient for Qin Wanru to make a decision like this because Qin Wanru was unwilling. Madam, let me and Huai think about it, okay? This, okay. Madame of Duke Xing said helplessly. She knew that she was too eager just now, so that she lost her composure and made Madame Dowager suspicious. But her mentality changed very quickly, and immediately put on a gentle smile on her face. Even if second Miss Qin and I are not destined to be together, I still have to express my gratitude. As she said this, she waved her hand. The two servant girls holding the gift box immediately understood, and immediately walked in front of Qin Wanru and respectfully presented the gift box, which meant that no matter what the result was, she still had to give the gift. Madam, I am willing to worship you as my adopted mother, and I will definitely show filial piety to you in the future. Seeing the two gift boxes appear in front of her, Qi Rongji breathed rapidly, and her eyes were greedy. After thinking for a while, she couldn't bear it anymore. She took 2 steps forward, knelt down in front of Madame of Duke Xing, and said respectfully. She knelt down so suddenly that people in the room didn't expect it. For a moment, everyone looked at her in astonishment. Although Qi Rongji's face was red, she still respectfully kowtowed to Madame of Duke Xing. Madam, rest assured. Even if your biological daughter is not with you all the time, I will treat myself as your biological daughter and show filial piety to you. For the sake of wealth, Qi Rongji also risked everything this time. Not only her face was red, but even her neck was red. But she still looked at Madame of Duke Xing eagerly, hoping that Madame of Duke Xing could regard her as her adopted daughter, and from then on, her status would skyrocket. Since Madame of Duke Xing specially prepared a gift for her, she must have a very good impression of her. She firmly believed that she would do better than Qin Wanru, and she was filial to Madame of Duke Xing. It happened suddenly. Madame of Duke Xing was still preparing to say something to finalize the matter of Qin Wanru, but was disturbed by Qi Rongji. Seeing Qi Rongji's expectant and greedy eyes, Madame of Duke Xing was so angry that her hands trembled. She was still thinking about how to trick Qin Wanru into Duke Xing's mansion, but she didn't expect that others also had ideas about her. This made Madame of Duke Xing, who had always felt that the overall situation was in her hands, angry. Chapter 246. Miss Qi, please get up. Let's talk about it when your elders come to the capital city. After thinking for a while, Madame of Duke Xing said slowly with a serious face. The old maid behind her hurried to help Qi Rongji up. Although it was an acceptable reason to be rejected, Qi Rongji's face was full of shame. She burst into tears, turned around, covered her face, and ran out. Grandma, I'm going to see first Miss Qi. Qin Wanru said hurriedly and chased after her. Nanny Zheng, who had been standing at the door and didn't follow her in, wanted to follow her, but Qin Wanru shook her hand and reached out to signal her to go inside. Nanny Zheng understood and asked a little servant girl to follow Qin Wanru out. She still stood outside the curtain at the door. There was a good thing here. The people inside could not see her, but she could hear the sound inside. Thank you for your kindness, Madame of Duke Xing. Let's talk about it later. I can't accept the gift now. Madame Dowager said with a smile in the room, but she was not as friendly as before. In this case, I won't force you. Madame Dowager and Ningyuan Army General can discuss it. If it weren't for second Miss Qin's kindness to Hao, I wouldn't come here at this time. Madame of Duke Xing said with a smile. At this time, her expression had returned to normal. She sat in the chair dignifiedly, and the two servant girls retreated behind her. Thank you for your kindness, Madame of Duke Xing. Madame Dowager said sincerely. In Madame Dowager's opinion, those who could still come here at this time were people who valued friendship and righteousness. She could talk to Zhuozhua about it later. It was indeed beneficial to have a marriage with Duke Xing's mansion. Madame of Duke Xing took off a bracelet from her wrist and said, that Miss Qi is quite bold just now, but our Duke Xing's mansion can't accept anyone. But after all, it's not very good. Nanny Sheng, go and see how she is doing. Give this bracelet of mine to her. It can be regarded as our fate. Originally, she wanted to find a chance to send someone out to ask about the news. Since someone bumped into her, it was just right, and it saved her a lot of trouble. Her words were very generous and decent. Yes, madam. The old maid behind her hurriedly stepped forward to take it respectfully, and then left in a hurry with the bracelet. It was between Qi Rongji and Madame of Duke Xing, so it was inconvenient for Madame Dowager to show up. She had intended to ask someone to take the old maid there, but the old maid had already lifted the curtain and left. While they were still chatting, Nanny Sheng of Duke Xing's mansion came out of the courtyard, stopped an old maid who did rough work in the courtyard, and asked her about the courtyard where Qi Rongji lived. Then she walked out of the outer courtyard without asking anyone to lead the way. However, when she got out of the courtyard and looked at the direction, she didn't leave in the direction pointed out by the old maid just now. Instead, she turned in another direction and hurriedly walked over. Not far behind her, Nanny Zheng stared at her closely and followed her all the way. After turning in several directions, the old maid actually went to Yulan Pavilion skillfully. As expected, she went to find Madame D, and she seemed to be very familiar with the way. If she hadn't been here several times, someone must have given her a detailed map. There were two rough old maids guarding the door of Yulan Pavilion, and the door was tightly closed. The old maid looked at it from a distance, stopped and frowned. It seemed that it was impossible to enter Yulan Pavilion in this way. When she was hesitating, she suddenly saw the door slightly open, and Mei Shui came out with a small basket. She thanked the two old maids at the door profusely, took out two pouches from her sleeves, and handed them to them. The two old maids took it with a smile, waved their hands, and let Mei Shui go. After Mei Shui came out, she didn't leave immediately. She turned around and saw Nanny Xing of Duke Xing's mansion waving to her at the next intersection. Her eyes lit up, and she looked around. The two rough old maids guarding Yulan Pavilion had already paid no attention to her, and hurriedly and cautiously ran over. Nanny Xing took Mei Shui to hide behind a big tree, lowered her voice, and asked, "What did your madam say?" "Our madam said that everything is up to you. Look, this is the address of those people." Mei Shui quickly took out a letter from the basket and handed it to Nanny Xing. Nanny Xing hurriedly took it, put it in her arms, and turned to leave in another direction. This time, Nanny Xing went to Qi Rongji's guest courtyard. The reason why she knew it so clearly was that the map she had received before detailed the place where everyone lived in the mansion. But even if she had remembered it clearly before, halfway, Nanny Xing still reached out to take out a hand-drawn map from her arms and wanted to take it out to have a look. She remembered the road from Madame Dowager's courtyard to Madame D very clearly, but she was not so clear about the way from Madame D to Qi Rongji's guest courtyard. Originally, Qi Rongji's matter was an accident, but it happened to be used by Madame of Duke Xing. Nanny Xing stood still and looked at it for a while. After recognizing the direction, she held the hand-drawn map in her hand. After walking for a while, she took it out again to have a look. Since she used Qi Rongji as an excuse, she had to go to the guest courtyard to have a look and go through the formalities. What she had to do had been done. Nanny Xing was very relaxed at this time and was not as vigilant as before. When she took it out again to have a look, suddenly a person came from the opposite side and happened to hit Nanny Xing. The person was so strong that Nanny Xing took 2 steps back and fell to the ground hard. The map in her hand had already fallen down. "Don't you have eyes when you walk?" Nanny Xing was hit and couldn't get up for a while. She shouted angrily. She was the henchman of Madame of Duke Xing and had always been very arrogant in Duke Xing's mansion. "Don't you have eyes?" Nanny Xing picked up the map from the ground and looked at it. She didn't pull Nanny Xing up and said coldly, "What do you mean? You are just a servant. How can you be so arrogant? Who gave you the courage?" Nanny Xing was so angry that her face turned blue. She stood up with the help of a tree on one side and scolded her sternly. Although the person opposite looked beautiful and imposing, she was wearing the clothes of a servant. Nanny Xing was really not afraid of the servant of Ningyuan Army General's mansion. "Aren't you a servant?" Nanny Xing said coldly and shook the map in her hand. "Tell me, where did you get this map? Why do you have the hand-drawn map of our mansion in your hand? And it is so detailed. What do you want to do? Give me the map." Nanny Xing was a little flustered. She looked around and lowered her voice and said angrily, "Do you want to hurt the master of our mansion?" Nanny Xing took a step back and her face became colder and colder. "Where does this cheap servant come from? What nonsense are you talking about? Give it back to me, or I will make you suffer." Nanny Xing threatened. At this time, there were no outsiders around, so she also breathed a sigh of relief. She was just a servant. How could the servant of Ningyuan Army General's mansion dare to offend her? "You plot against the master of our mansion and dare to threaten me. Well, let's go to report it to Madame Dowager now and see what Madame Dowager will say," Nanny Xing said with a sneer. She took a step back and raised the map in her hand. "Ask where this map comes from. What are you looking for in our mansion with this map? Give the map back to me." Seeing that Nanny Xing was going to complain, Nanny Xing was angry and anxious. She put her hands on her hips and threatened loudly, "I am a servant of Madame of Duke Xing. I came here with our madam today. Even if something happens, what can your Madame Dowager do to me? At that time, as long as I say that this map is yours, Madame Dowager won't disrespect our madam." Of course, it was better not to make a big deal out of it. Nanny Xing also understood this. Madame of Duke Xing came to our mansion to meet our Madame Dowager, but secretly asked you to look for someone with the map. The direction you came from should be Madame D's courtyard, right? You even secretly went to meet Madame D. Could it be that Madame of Duke Xing came to our mansion today not to thank our second miss, but actually to contact Madame D? Nanny Zheng's face changed and she said loudly. Her guess was very accurate. She almost guessed the interaction between Madame of Duke Xing and Madame D. Nanny Xing's face also changed. She rushed forward and wanted to grab the map in Nanny Zheng's hand. Nanny Zheng had been prepared. She took a step back and ran away. Nanny Xing chased after her and said, "If you dare to talk nonsense, our madam will definitely ask your Madam Dowager to punish you later. Let's see whether your Madam Dowager believes you, a servant or our madam." Madame of Duke Xing's identity was far inferior to Madame Dowager of Qin's mansion. For this reason, although Nanny Xing panicked, she did not lose her composure. It was just a small Ningyuan army general's mansion. Did they really dare to disrespect their madam? Your Madame of Duke Xing conspired against our general's mansion. Nanny Zheng was much younger than Nanny Sheng, so she naturally ran very fast. Moreover, she was familiar with the way. After a few turns, she took a shortcut to Qin Huayong's study. "You, stop, you, how dare you steal our madam's things? Stop now!" Nanny Xing suddenly shouted loudly. It seemed that she wanted others to hear her shouting, which was completely different from her sneaky behavior just now. However, Nanny Zheng ignored her and turned into a yard in front of her. A servant was guarding at the door of the yard. Hearing the sound coming from outside, he hurriedly ran out and met Nanny Zheng, who had already run to the door. "Is the general here?" Nanny Zheng asked in a low voice. "Yes, inside." The servant hurriedly nodded. He knew Nanny Zheng. "Second miss, are you looking for the general?" "There is an old maid of Duke Xing's mansion outside. She took this map and searched for something in our mansion. Give this map to the general." Nanny Zheng handed the map in her hand to the servant, but she did not go into the yard. Instead, she ran around the yard for a while. Nanny Zheng finally caught up with her panting. Seeing Nanny Zheng resting against the wall in front of her, she immediately quickened her pace and rushed over. "Do you want to die? Give the map back to me. As long as I say that you stole our madam's things, you can only be beaten to death." When she ran to Nanny Zheng, Nanny Zheng also lost her strength. She leaned against the wall and glared at Nanny Zheng fiercely. Chapter 247. There was only a high wall here, and there was no one around, so Nanny Zheng was really not afraid of being heard. "Where did you get the map? Why do you have such a detailed map of our mansion? Why did you go to Madame D's place just now? Does your Madame of Duke Xing want to do something with Madame D that can't be known by others?" Nanny Zheng raised her eyebrows and looked at Nanny Xing aggressively. Nanny Xing was Madame of Duke Xing's personal nanny and had seen a lot of things, but compared with Nanny Zheng, she was still a little inferior. After so many years in the palace, Nanny Zheng had climbed up from a small palace maid to the position of confidante. The meaning of this was not comparable to that of a nanny of a madam of an aristocratic family. "Do you want to die quickly? How dare you talk nonsense like this? Let's see whether your master can protect you or my madam can kill you," Nanny Xing said fiercely. "Your madam? Does Madame of Duke Xing come to our mansion today for another purpose?" The cold snort was just beside her, and it was a man's majestic voice. Nanny Xing's face changed greatly. She suddenly turned around and saw that a closed door on the high wall was opened. Qin Huayong stood at the door with his hands behind his back and a gloomy face. Nanny Xing actually didn't know Qin Huayong, but she had seen a lot of people. There was only one person in Qin's mansion who dressed like this, so she immediately panicked and changed her face. "General." Nanny Zheng stepped forward and saluted. "Nanny Zheng, did you find anything?" Qin Huayong couldn't treat Nanny Zheng as an ordinary servant, so he asked her with a gentler look. "Ningyuan Army General, it's this servant in your mansion who framed me. He deliberately said some specious words and deliberately led me here. He just wanted to frame my madam and me for being unjust." Seeing this, Nanny Zheng became anxious and immediately shouted to defend herself, while glaring at Nanny Zheng fiercely. She didn't believe that an old maid of general's mansion was more convincing than her. Search her for what she took, Qin Huayong said coldly. The two servants behind him came over and grabbed Nanny Sheng on each side. Nanny Sheng came over and searched her. She immediately took out an envelope from her arms and presented it to Qin Huayong respectfully. When Nanny Sheng saw it, she felt dizzy and couldn't help trembling. But she was different from ordinary people. She gritted her teeth and said nothing more. She would wait until Madame came. Anyway, the letter did not say anything, so it was not important evidence. Would Ningyuan Army General's mansion dare to offend Madame because of a servant's words? At most, this matter would be loud thunder, but small raindrops. When the time comes, a big problem would be reduced to a small one, and a small one would be nothing. Qin Huayong took the letter, turned around, and walked into the courtyard, followed by two servants carrying Nanny Sheng. Nanny Sheng also followed them in and closed the side door of this place. When Madame of Duke Xing was invited over, Nanny Sheng was forced to kneel in the corridor. Seeing Madame of Duke Xing come in, Nanny Sheng hurriedly called, "Madam." "What's going on?" Madame of Duke Xing's face darkened. She was about to walk over and ask the two servants to let Nanny Sheng go. "Madam, please. My father is still waiting inside." When Qin Huayong sent someone to invite Madame of Duke Xing, Qin Wanru happened to return to Madame Dowager's Xining pavilion. She asked to accompany Madame of Duke Xing. At this time, she smiled faintly and said, "It was against the rules to let someone go before seeing the master. Let's go." Madame of Duke Xing also came to her senses at this time. She smiled again and said slowly, with her deep eyes falling on Qin Wanru. In the study, Qin Huayong was sitting. When he saw Madame of Duke Xing coming over, he stood up and greeted her. Then they sat down according to the host and the guest. Qin Wanru took a few steps forward and stood behind Qin Huayong. She glanced at Nanny Zheng who was standing on the side. Nanny Zheng nodded to her silently with a slight smile on her lips. "What does Ningyuan Army General mean? Why did you detain my old maid? Did my old maid do something to annoy the general?" Madame of Duke Xing asked lightly after sitting down. Qin Huayong looked at Nanny Zheng. Nanny Zheng nodded and stood out. She told the whole process again with a serious face. Of course, the reason was that Nanny Sheng asked to find the guest courtyard where Miss Qi lived, but actually went to Madame D's courtyard. This attracted Nanny Zheng's attention, so Qin Huayong followed her there. Nanny Zheng's words were very orderly. She saw the whole process in detail. In the end, there was a simple map and a letter as evidence. These two pieces of evidence now fell on Qin Huayong's desk. Qin Huayong had seen them just now. The map was very detailed, and even some special places at corners were clearly marked. There were several names and an address in the envelope, but nothing else. Qin Huayong didn't understand what these were for at the moment. Madame of Duke Xing was very calm. Even if Nanny Zheng said everything in detail and had evidence, she didn't panic. After Nanny Zheng finished, she slightly raised the corners of her mouth and showed a trace of sarcasm. "Ningyuan Army General, did you confirm that the people in my mansion did something against the rules just based on the one-sided words of a servant in your mansion? Are the servants of our Duke Xing's mansion inferior to the servants of your general's mansion?" Qin Huayong was just an official of the third level of the secondary class, while Duke Xing was a first-class duke's mansion. Moreover, Duke Xing himself was a first-class official. From this point of view, Ningyuan Army General's mansion and Duke Xing's mansion naturally couldn't be compared. As for the servants, they were also divided into 3, 6, and 9 grades, and Duke Xing's mansion was undoubtedly the highest grade. Madame of Duke Xing's words could be said to hurt Qin Huayong's heart. She knew that Qin Huayong would not dare to agree. "Madam, you're right. The old maid in your mansion really can't compare with Nanny Zheng." Qin Wanru answered with a smile and bowed slightly to Nanny Zheng politely. Nanny Zheng stood straight and accepted Qin Wanru's half bow before leaving. Then she also bowed to Qin Wanru. Her behavior was impeccable. Such a behavior, and even dared to accept her master's half-bow was not something that ordinary servants could do. Who is she? Madame of Duke Xing's expression changed slightly for the first time. She is a nanny released from the palace and my etiquette instructor. She can't be compared with ordinary servants. She sold herself for more convenience. Madam, do you think I'm right? Qin Wanru said unhurriedly. She deliberately took Nanny Zheng out instead of Qing Yu and Yu Jie because of the suppression of her identity. The etiquette instructor released from the imperial palace could not be compared with ordinary servants. Even if this person was the servant of the Madame of Marquis, so what? Madame of Duke Xing's face became very ugly. She certainly knew this Nanny Zheng. At the beginning, she had planned this matter, but she did not expect that things would change later. In fact, the identity of Nanny Zheng was not only an etiquette instructor in the palace, but also related to other things. Therefore, when Nanny Zheng was released from the palace, no one dared to invite her. But this did not prevent some people who knew the inside story from avoiding Nanny Zheng, because she used to be a chief palace maid. Madame of Duke Xing, I am not as good as the words of a servant in your mansion. Nanny Zheng's eyes fell on Madame of Duke Xing and she said slowly. What Nanny Zheng said is naturally true, but there may be a misunderstanding. Madame of Duke Xing immediately adjusted her thoughts and said with a smile. Can I ask my old maid what on earth is going on? Madam, please. Qin Huayong nodded and asked someone to bring Nanny Xing in. As soon as she entered the door, Nanny Xing broke away from the hands of the two servants, rushed to the feet of Madame of Duke Xing, and cried loudly, Madam, it is that cheap servant who framed me. It is obvious that everything is planned by her. I don't know how I offended her and let her make such rumors and make trouble. Since Madame of Duke Xing was here, Nanny Zheng would not be afraid of anyone at this time. She pointed at Nanny Zheng and scolded angrily. Pa! A slap made Nanny Xing kneel on the ground. She was stunned and looked at Madame of Duke Xing, who looked cold and fierce in front of her. She could not come to herself for a moment. Ma! Madam! This is Nanny Zheng, an etiquette instructor from the palace. Now she is teaching second Miss Qin in Ningyuan Army General's mansion. How can a servant like you point at her at will? Madame of Duke Xing said coldly and scolded angrily. Nanny Zheng was stunned, but immediately came to herself. After looking at Madame of Duke Xing, she cried out her grievance loudly, Madam, I am wronged. I just asked for the way and then went out to find it. Later, I met a servant girl and asked for the way. I knew I went the wrong way. As for the map, I picked it up on the road. Qin Wanru looked at the interaction between Madame of Duke Xing and Nanny Zheng and sneered in her heart. Nanny Zheng was indeed a trusted subordinate for many years. As Madame of Duke Xing did this, Nanny Zheng immediately understood. Qin Wanru glanced at Nanny Zheng's face silently with her watery eyes. Sometimes it did not need too much evidence to determine whether something was true or not. You got lost first, and then picked up the simple map of General's mansion? Madame of Duke Xing frowned and asked helplessly. Qin Wanru raised her eyebrows and continued to listen calmly without refuting. Yes, that's it. Madam, I am really wronged. Nanny Zheng became louder and louder. She even rubbed her red eyes and looked extremely wronged. You old servant, why don't you come to report to me immediately? Madame of Duke Xing was exasperated at Nanny Zheng's failure to meet her expectations and punched Nanny Zheng's shoulder hard. Madam, I just wanted to come back and tell you later. I didn't expect such a misunderstanding. Nanny Zheng cried out her grievance again. Chapter 248. Since it is a misunderstanding, madam, please go back. Qin Huayong said calmly. He didn't even ask whether it was true or not, and he didn't even ask for confirmation. However, from his tone, it was obvious that he didn't believe it, and his attitude was much colder. Besides, he seemed to want to drive her away, which made Madame of Duke Xing feel embarrassed. However, this topic was directly cut off by Qin Huayong, so she had no way to say it. Madame of Duke Xing had prepared a lot of words to explain, but she found that her explanation was useless. She had a feeling that she was going to throw a heavy punch, but in the end, her punch fell on cotton. For a moment, she looked embarrassed. Fortunately, she was just embarrassed for a while. Madame of Duke Xing stood up and said with a displeased look, "Since it is a misunderstanding, it is good to explain it now." "Then I will leave." Qin Huayong nodded and stood up as if he was going to see her off. Madame of Duke Xing's identity was there, and necessary respect was necessary. "Father, I will see Madame of Duke Xing off," Qin Wanru said softly. Qin Huayong nodded and didn't insist. He sat down again and looked at the two evidences on the table. His look made Madame of Duke Xing's eyebrows twitch involuntarily, and she was a little flustered. However, thinking that there was nothing written on it, even if Qin Huayong saw it, it didn't matter. She turned and left immediately, and Qin Wanru followed her to see her off. After a few steps, Madame of Duke Xing slowed down. She looked back at Qin Wanru and gently waved her hand, motioning her to come forward. When she came forward, Madame of Duke Xing said affectionately, "I wanted to adopt you as my daughter. I really like second miss, and I want to raise you as my biological daughter and make you the miss of our Duke Xing's mansion. But now it seems that I can't do that. I am afraid that your father has a prejudice against me." Qin Wanru sneered in her heart. At this point, Madame of Duke Xing still deceived her as an ignorant child. "Thank you for your kindness, madam." Qin Wanru slightly folded her sleeves and said, "You are so likable. Originally, your grandmother also agreed to it, but I didn't expect that such a thing would happen. If you can become my adopted daughter, you will definitely become a famous miss of an aristocratic family in the capital city in the future. With the background of Duke Xing's mansion, you can even marry a prince or a prince in the future," Madame of Duke Xing said with a tempting tone. Then she sighed, as if she was talking to herself, but Qin Wanru happened to hear it. "I don't know who made this thing become like this today. It's such a coincidence. In the past, when I was in the mansion, this old servant was quite useful. It meant that what Nanny Sheng had done in Qin's mansion today was used by someone with ulterior motives, and the purpose was to make use of eunuch's good thing for Qin Wanru." Qin Wanru's butterfly-like long eyelashes fluttered slightly to hide the malice at the bottom of her eyes. Madame of Duke Xing really coaxed others as fools as usual. In this case, she still coaxed Qin Wanru, saying that this matter was framed by someone with ulterior motives and pushing all the blame onto Madame D. She pushed all the blame away. Qin Wanru showed a trace of gratitude on her face, but she did not answer. She looked a little dull and seemed to be childish and not very sensible. "Your grandmother is old, and your mother is pregnant now. Even if I have the intention, I can't do anything. No matter whether this thing succeeds or not, if you have any difficulties in the future, you can still come to me directly. I will definitely help you if I can. It can be said that it is a predestined relationship between us." Madame of Duke Xing sighed with satisfaction. Along the way, Madame of Duke Xing coaxed and flattered Qin Wanru, constantly expressing that she really liked Qin Wanru. Qin Wanru treated her with a smile, but did not tell the truth. Qin Wanru sent Madame of Duke Xing to the gate of the mansion, and then turned to walk to Qin Huayong's study. In the study, Qin Huayong was still looking at the names and addresses on the envelope. After thinking about it, he could not figure out who these names were. As for the address, it was even more ordinary, not like a mansion. "Father, who are these people?" After Qin Wanru came in and saluted, she looked at the names on the envelope curiously. "I don't know. I have never heard of them." Qin Huayong shook his head. "Then why did Madame give this letter to Madame of Duke Xing?" Qin Wanru said in surprise. After saying that, she seemed to feel that she had said something wrong. She stopped talking and looked at Qin Huayong pitifully. After all, Madame of Duke Xing did not admit that she had anything to do with Madame D in the end. I don't know. Fortunately, Qin Huayong did not mean to blame her and said gently. This map is really well drawn. It is really a simple map. Madame of Duke Xing also said just now. Who on earth drew it? Qin Wanru raised her small face. It seemed that she wanted to change the previous topic, and pointed to the simple map placed aside and said. Madame of Duke Xing did say that it was a simple map before, but when she said that, she did not look at the map at all. From this, it could be seen that she lied. Qin Huayong's eyes moved from the letter to the simple map, and his face became cold. It was a simple map of the general's mansion, and it was drawn so carefully. If someone with evil intentions got it, it was very easy to get into trouble. There were not many people in this mansion who could draw it so clearly. After thinking for a while, he stood up and put the 2 pieces of evidence into his sleeve. He said to Qin Wanru, "You go back first. I will deal with it for you." "Yes, father." "Then I will go to accompany mother and grandmother." Qin Wanru nodded obediently and turned to leave. Suddenly, she seemed to suddenly think of something. She turned around hurriedly and said, "Father, the surname of those people just now seems to be the same as the surname of the person mother married before." Hearing this, Qin Huayong's face immediately became fierce. He suddenly thought of a person. "Madam, there is no more news about this matter?" The carriage of Duke Xing's mansion moved slowly. In the carriage, Madame of Duke Xing had long lost the gentleness in Qin's mansion. She leaned on the cushion with a cold face and half closed her eyes. Looking at her expression, Nanny Sheng asked cautiously. "With what happened today, I am afraid it is impossible to make them let down their guard and let Qin Wanru regard me as her adoptive mother." Madame of Duke Xing said coldly. She slowly opened her eyes and looked at Nanny Sheng coldly. "Madam, it is all my fault. I did not expect that the servant was actually from the palace. If I had known it, I would have snatched it back at that time." Seeing that the situation was not good, Nanny Sheng directly knelt down in the carriage and slapped herself mercilessly. Her face immediately swelled up. "Well, it seems that someone is deliberately watching this matter." Madame of Duke Xing sneered and said. It was too coincidental. It seemed that Nanny Sheng was targeted as soon as she went out. This should not be intentional. You see, later General's mansion did not say anything about this matter. Nanny Sheng ignored the swelling pain on her face and said hurriedly. If she was really targeted by someone deliberately, and she did not know it, then she was too useless. Maybe Madame of Duke Xing wanted to change a confidant. This reason made Madame of Duke Xing silent for a while. Until now, she still could not figure out whether this matter was really an accident or intentional. If it was intentional, who was it? It was unlikely for Madame D, and it seemed impossible for Madame Shui, and it was even more impossible for Madame Dowager. Madame Dowager had intended to let Qin Wanru directly recognize her before. Was it Qin Huayong? It was impossible for a general to care about this kind of inner court heart. Then there was only Qin Wanru. Madame of Duke Xing directly rejected this answer. Just now, on the way here, she also observed Qin Wanru's expression. It did not look like it. "Madam, what should we do next?" "Those are the places where the people of Madame Shui's husband's family live. Now we don't know where they live." Nanny Sheng did not read the letter just now, so she did not know what the address given by Madame D was. She had secretly communicated with Madame D before. This time, she sent the addresses of several close relatives of Shui Rulan's husband's family that Madame D found from Jiangzhou to Madame of Duke Xing, and Madame of Duke Xing instructed them to make trouble. Let's not care about this for now. We haven't taken over yet. Even if something happens, it has nothing to do with us. Madame of Duke Xing said coldly. The falling curtain blocked the light, which made her look a little gloomy. But, in this way, the contact with Qin's mansion will be cut off. You want to second Miss Qin, but you can't. Nanny Sheng was afraid that she would bear the responsibility in the end, so she secretly observed Madame of Duke Xing's face and cautiously reminded her. It was better to be reminded by herself than by others. Humph, if she doesn't want to have anything to do with me, then let her have to have something to do with me. Let her come to me and beg me. Madame of Duke Xing sneered, and her lips curved with cold sarcasm. A small Ningyuan army general's mansion dares to challenge our Duke Xing's mansion. She doesn't know whether she is qualified or not. That's right. A small general's mansion has just entered the capital city, and she thinks that she is a bigwig in the capital city. She doesn't know whether she is qualified or not. Nanny Sheng hurriedly despised Qin Huayong with her master. Then she tilted her head and asked cautiously, Madam, what should we do next? Let's wait and see. I will definitely get Qin Wanru. Madame of Duke Xing said viciously, with a trace of sharpness flashing in her eyes. This girl could not be kept alive. Does Rui and great elder princess know something? Nanny Sheng was shocked, shrank her neck, and felt a little cold at the back of her head. She was not afraid of Ningyuan army general's mansion, but she was still afraid of Rui and great elder princess. Duke Xing's mansion was a first-class duke's mansion, and Rui and great elder princess's identity was even more noble. She won't know. How could she know? Zhuozhua, it's really her. Madame of Duke Xing's voice sounded extremely cold in the narrow carriage, and the faint smile on her face was even more frightening. She has been suppressing me before. Now I will let her see who is the most noble one. Now she is just a fool. How can she compete with me? Spread the news that I want to accept Qin Wanru as my adopted daughter, and say that I specially went to Qin's mansion to have a look, and I am very satisfied. Nanny Sheng did not dare to speak. She lowered her head deeply, with cold sweat on her back. Even as a trusted subordinate, she did not know much about this matter, and did not dare to hear too much. She would rather not know this kind of thing. Chapter 249. Miss, the general went to find the first miss. Was it painted by the first miss? Yu Jie reported. Qin Wanru raised her eyebrows and said with certainty, it's not her. If it's not the first miss, why did the general go to find the first miss angrily? Yu Jie asked in confusion. She had guessed that it was not the first miss who painted it. It was painted by Madame D. Qin Wanru said slowly and sat down in a pavilion to have a rest. It was a good day today. The wind was not strong, and the sunshine was warm. This pavilion outside the rockery could block the wind and enjoy the sunshine. It was a good place. It could also have a wide view. Since it was painted by Madame D, why did she find the first miss? It seems that this has nothing to do with the first miss, right? Yu Jie said. It was Mei Shui who contacted the old maid of Duke Xing's mansion. Mei Shui is Qin Yuru's servant. Duke Xing's mansion can deny it, but Mei Shui can't. Father locked Madame D and grounded Qin Yuru, but Mei Shui went to find Madame D. This is originally wrong. Qin Wanru said slowly. Compared with Madame D, Qin Yuru was a better breakthrough, and it was indeed Mei Shui, Qin Yuru's servant girl, who intervened in it. Yu Jie was also smart. Hearing Qin Wanru's words, she immediately understood and nodded repeatedly. It's my mistake. It is indeed the first miss who caused the trouble. But why did Madame of Duke Xing do this? Isn't she on good terms with our mansion? At this time, she came to our mansion and thanked Mississippi. Is this all fake? If it were not for the matter of Nanny Sheng, everyone in the mansion would think that Madame of Duke Xing was an affectionate and righteous person. She was also good to Qin's mansion and appreciated Qin Wanru very much. Why does Madame of Duke Xing appreciate me? Qin Wanru smiled and said meaningfully. Because she thanked you for saving Master Hao. Yu Jie said. Madame of Duke Xing is good to Hao, Qin Wanru shook her head and leaned lazily on the pillar of the pavilion. This is not good, but she has to pretend on the surface. Yujia understood at first, and then she was at a loss. Why didn't she do it earlier? Why do you have to do it now? Qin Wanru narrowed her eyes. When her grandmother called her Zhuozhuo, Madame of Duke Xing didn't seem to be abnormal. But when she looked closely, her smile at that time was very strange and her eyes were very gloomy. This meant that his nickname had affected her greatly. Even though Madame of Duke Xing's expression was fleeting at that time, Qin Wanru still caught the unconcealable gloominess and fear on her face. Madame of Duke Xing had heard of this name. This. I don't know. Could it be that she needs to prepare? Yu Jia asked. It's possible. Qin Wanru smiled slightly and sat up straight. Her eyes fell on the person who was walking over slowly, and her lips curled up silently. Sure enough, Qi Rongji couldn't sit still. Since Qi Rongji was able to enter the capital city and live in the Qin's mansion, she must have some backing. Otherwise, the crafty magistrate Qi would not be so at ease. Well, I need it too. Yu Jia followed her gaze and immediately saw Qi Rongji, who came over with a gloomy face. She immediately stood behind Qin Wanru obediently. Her miss just said that she would wait for first Miss Qi here. Yu Jia now admired second Miss more and more. Originally, she thought that she was older than second Miss and could be counted as second Miss's senior sister, so she should give second Miss some advice. Unexpectedly, second Miss, who looked like a jade doll, was more intelligent than others. However, such second Miss was inexplicably convincing and reassuring. Several people of Jifang Pavilion felt more and more confident because of Qin Wanru. Qin Wanru, what do you mean? Qi Rongji came over angrily. After coming in, she sat on the stone bench opposite Qin Wanru and said angrily. What do I mean? What does first Miss Qi ask? Qin Wanru said calmly. You just instigated me to come forward to say those words and do those things. What is your intention? Qin Wanru, I can't imagine that you are so vicious at such a young age. Do you want Madame of Duke Xing to hate me? Qi Rongji raised her eyebrows and said loudly, with her face flushed with anger. What benefits do I get by doing this? Qin Wanru said lightly. Qi Rongji was like this. No matter what she did, as long as she made a mistake, it would be someone else's fault. She would always put the blame on others. Whether it was right or not, she was always right and innocent. In the past, she didn't understand why Qi Rongji treated her so cruelly, but now she understood. Since Qi Rongji couldn't push the blame on Qin Yuru, it was the most appropriate to push it on herself. Some people were born mean and vicious, such as Qi Rongji and Qin Yuru. You are trying to win the favor of Madame of Duke Xing. Qi Rongji was stunned by the question, but then she said angrily. I don't want to win the favor of Madame of Duke Xing, nor do I want to become the adopted daughter of Madame of Duke Xing, so I don't have any intention. Qin Wanru smiled a little coldly. Nonsense. You are greedy for the wealth of Duke Xing's mansion, so you deliberately did this to make Madame of Duke Xing think that I have a bad character and you have a good character. Qin Wanru, I really misjudged you. Your character is so bad. Qi Rongji said harshly and stared at Qin Wanru. She thought so. So the more she thought about it, the angrier she became. She couldn't sit still and directly came to find Qin Wanru. Character? Qi Rongji, how dare you talk to me about character? Do you have such a thing? Qin Wanru narrowed her eyes, but her eyes were as sharp as a knife. Her eyes seemed to pierce through the deepest darkness of Qi Rongji, making her uncomfortable. She tilted her head, but immediately turned back and stared at Qin Wanru again, saying, What nonsense are you talking about? She didn't feel guilty when she said this in front of others, but in front of Qin Wanru, she did feel guilty, which reminded her of all the things she had done to Qin Wanru in the past. But no matter how guilty she was, Qi Rongji felt that she couldn't have stage fright. She couldn't deal with Qin Wanru. Qi Rongji, I don't care what you want to do, but I have to tell you one thing. I don't like Madame of Duke Xing, so I won't be the adopted daughter of Madame of Duke Xing. If you have the means, just do it yourself. I won't rob you. Qin Wanru raised her eyebrows and smiled more calmly. You really won't? Qi Rongji was stunned at first, and then she was overjoyed. She raised her head and put on an arrogant expression. You swear that if you have any idea about Duke Xing's mansion, you will die a horrible death, and all the people in your Qin's mansion will die a horrible death. Qi Rongji, who do you think you are? Qin Wanru smiled, and her smile was a little cold. Qi Rongji couldn't help shivering, and inexplicably felt that there was a kind of chill in the air, which penetrated into her bone marrow. I said I don't want to. As for other things, Qi Rongji, you should know that you are an orphan in our mansion now. Madame D and big sister may owe you, but my mother, grandmother, and I don't owe you anything. If I really want to drive you out at this time, what do you think will happen? Qin Wanru stood up and smiled. You, what do you mean? Qi Rongji also stood up in a hurry and stepped back vigilantly, feeling a little guilty inexplicably. What do you mean? Don't you know? Qi Rongji, you have no foundation in the capital now. You can't compare with me. Qin Wanru smiled disdainfully, looked her up and down with her watery eyes, and then smiled slightly, turned and walked out of the pavilion. Yujia, who was behind her, also tilted her head and looked at Qi Rongji curiously. She also smiled with a little sarcasm, and then chased after Qin Wanru. Behind her, Qi Rongji was trembling with anger. She slammed her hand on the stone table in front of her and gritted her teeth. She wanted to cut Qin Wanru into pieces. How dare she talk to her like this? Where was the gentle and naive Qin Wanru? Why did she suddenly seem to be a different person? Miss, don't be impulsive. This is the Ningyuan Army General's mansion in the capital. Chuni, who came with her, was afraid that she would really rush out, and hurriedly reached out to stop her. Do you also think that I can't do anything to her? Qi Rongji asked, gritting her teeth. I dare not. Chuni hurriedly lowered her head, for fear that Qi Rongji would vent her anger on her. Humph, a bastard, does she really think that she is a miss from an aristocratic family? I must let people know that she is actually not the daughter of Ningyuan Army General. Qi Rongji was so angry that her face turned blue. She wished that she could see Qin Wanru's hateful face in front of her. She must tear her face off. Me. Miss, she comes again. Chuni stammered and reminded Qi Rongji. Qi Rongji looked up and immediately took 2 steps back. She stared closely at Qin Wanru, who unexpectedly walked back slowly. Her face turned blue and purple. She clearly knew that she really had no ability to fight with Qin Wanru now. First, Miss Qi, if you don't want to be driven out of Ningyuan Army General's mansion, you should obediently hide in the guest yard and don't make trouble anywhere. I heard that it was you who first exposed Big Sister's matter. Qin Wanru came over with a friendly smile and a low voice. But when it fell on Qi Rongji's ears, it was like thunder, so that she almost couldn't stand still. She hurriedly reached out to hold the side of the pavilion and looked at Qin Wanru with shock and horror. Such a secret matter, except for herself, only her brother knew. How could Qin Wanru know it? Do you think that why I know it? Qi Rongji, there is no impenetrable wall in this world. If Father and Madame D know that it is because of you, what do you think they will do? Qin Wanru smiled more and more gently, but Qi Rongji felt that this smile was cold and horrible. Subconsciously, she held the pillar tightly and her face turned pale. Obviously, she wanted to curse as before, but at this time, she felt that Qin Wanru was very dangerous, so she didn't dare to. Glancing at Qi Rongji contemptuously, Qin Wanru directly left this time without looking back. In the pavilion, Qi Rongji calmed down. Looking at Qin Wanru's back, she gritted her teeth. This matter was not over. It was imperative for her to become the adopted daughter of Madame of Duke Xing. Qin Wanru's behavior just now also made her realize that only by becoming the adopted daughter of Madame of Duke Xing could she trample on Qin Wanru again. Chapter 250. Qi Tianyu and Qi Baiyu were invited the next day. They went to Qi Rongji's guest house together. Big brother, you are finally here. Seeing Qi Tianyu standing at the door, Qi Rongji ran out excitedly. But when she saw Qi Baiyu behind Qi Tianyu, she immediately stopped, rolled her eyes at Qi Baiyu, and said unhappily, Big brother, why is he here? Don't be rude. Call me second brother. Qi Tianyu's face darkened slightly. Second brother. Although Qi Rongji was unwilling, she still called him obediently. Then she pointed at the outside of the courtyard and said, Second brother, please walk around by yourself. I have something important to say to you. Then she pulled Qi Tianyu into the courtyard, leaving Qi Baiyu alone outside the courtyard. Qi Tianyu turned back and said to Qi Baiyu with humility, Second brother, please wait outside. I will leave after saying a few words. Qi Baiyu twitched his mouth and nodded indifferently. He didn't walk away casually. Looking around, he found a corridor outside the courtyard to lean against and enjoy the scenery. Although Qin's mansion was small, the scenery was good, especially the guest house, which was full of ingenuity. The rockery was exquisite, the trees were tall, and the slightly raised eaves were also unique. Big brother, do you know that Qin Wanru is not General Qin's biological daughter? As soon as they entered the room, Qi Rongji sent everyone out and asked hurriedly. What's wrong? Qi Tianyu frowned and said unhappily. Big brother, I know you know it. Father and mother must have evidence in your hands. Qi Rongji said hurriedly, and reached out to pull Qi Tianyu's sleeve and said coquettishly, Big brother, spread the evidence. What do you want to do? Qi Tianyu's face changed slightly, but he didn't deny it. I want to recognize Madame of Duke Xing as my adoptive mother, but Madame of Duke Xing can't decide whether to recognize me or Qin Wanru. As long as Qin Wanru's real identity is revealed and Madame of Duke Xing knows that Qin Wanru is just picked up, Madame of Duke Xing will definitely not choose her. Qi Rongji said confidently. Madame of Duke Xing. Qi Tianyu was slightly stunned and looked at Qi Rongji suspiciously. He had always been very clear about his younger sister's ability and did not think that she would have any relationship with Madame of Duke Xing. It's true. Madame of Duke Xing came to Qin's mansion yesterday and also gave me a gift. Look. Qi Rongji shook her ears. The pair of earrings on her ears were shining brightly. Even though Qi Tianyu did not know much about this kind of jewelry, he knew that they were exquisite. Is this true? How much benefit would this benefit him? His handsome eyes looked at Qi Rongji and became a little deeper. Wanru wants to compete with you for the identity of the adopted daughter of Madame of Duke Xing? Yes, she is such a person. She used to snatch Qin Yuru's, and now she wants to snatch mine. She doesn't know how lowly she is and whether she deserves it or not. Qi Rongji sneered harshly. In fact, she had known this matter for a long time, so she unscrupulously bullied Qin Wanru because she knew that Madame D would not stand up for Qin Wanru. Qi Tianyu frowned and said nothing. Big brother, you are not really nice to this bitch, are you? Qi Rongji looked at Qi Tianyu in a fuss. Nonsense. Qi Tianyu's eyes showed a little displeasure and his expression became cold. Okay, I won't say it. Big brother, please help me. If I become the adopted daughter of Madame of Duke Xing, I can directly live in Duke Xing's mansion. In this way, no matter what I do, I will have the support of Duke Xing's mansion. It will even help you in the imperial examination. Qi Rongji shook Qi Tianyu's sleeves coquettishly. Does Madame of Duke Xing like you? Qi Tianyu did not answer and asked after thinking for a while. Yes, big brother, please believe me. She really likes me. You can know how much she likes me when you see the gifts she gave me. I heard that the first miss of Madame of Duke Xing has not been with her these days. If I go to Duke Xing's mansion, she will definitely think more of me. But if I can't go there, I will lose everything. Qi Rongji became more and more anxious. Big brother, please help me. If I get better, you will also get better. We are brother and sister. How can I be worse than an outsider? Qi Tianyu fell silent again and did not speak for a long time. Qi Rongji waited for a while and saw that he did not speak, so she became anxious. When she was about to say something, she saw him raise his head and say, "Okay, I promise you, but you also promise me." Speaking of this, he hesitated for a while and did not continue. What Qi Rongji said was reasonable, but Qi Tianyu did not think that he should show all his cards at this time. "Big brother, I know. Don't worry, I will not do anything to Qin Wanru." Qi Rongji smiled knowingly and nodded repeatedly. Qi Tianyu frowned and did not speak immediately. After a while, he stood up and said, "Then I will go back first. Be careful. This is Qin's mansion in the capital city. We have no foundation here." Since the matter had been achieved, Qi Rongji was also full of joy and would listen to whatever he said at this time. "Big brother, don't worry. I will be careful. We have no foundation in the capital city, so we need to urgently find a foundation. Duke Xing's mansion is very good. With the foundation of Duke Xing's mansion, it will be good for both you and me." What she said was true, and the meaning in it was more thought-provoking. Qi Tianyu took a deep breath, nodded and walked out. Qi Rongji walked him to the door, and then rolled her eyes at Qi Tianyu who was in the corridor outside. She did not say anything to him and went back to the yard gracefully. Seeing Qi Tianyu coming out, Qi Baiyu jumped out of the corridor and came to Qi Tianyu very quickly. "Big brother. Don't blame her. She has always been careless and always thinks that she is still in Jiangzhou." Qi Tianyu sighed and his elegant eyes fell on Qi Baiyu. "If there is anything, please forgive her for the sake of you, big brother. In the future, she will marry someone else, and we will still be in the mansion." This meant that Qi Rongji would not be a member of the Qi family in the future. Moreover, Qi Rongji was too old to stay in the family for a long time. After she got married, she would not have much relationship with the Qi family. It implied that he and Qi Baiyu were the real mainstays of the Qi family. "Big brother, don't worry. I won't argue with third sister. Is she living well here? Did she quarrel with anyone?" Qi Baiyu nodded, squinted, and said casually, "Ning Yuan Army General's mansion is very good to her. She is living well here, but she has a childish temper, and sometimes she will throw a tantrum in the boudoir. Forget it, let's go. As long as she knows that she is not in Jiangzhou." Qi Tianyu said helplessly. He slightly shook his head and turned to walk out with his hands clasped behind his back. Qi Baiyu's lips curved slightly. He suddenly took 2 steps forward and asked, "Big brother, should we go and see Ning Yuan Army General? We are already in the mansion. If we don't go and see him, I am afraid it will be inappropriate. We should go and see him. Let's go." Although Qi Tianyu did not have any idea before, he thought it made sense now. He turned and walked in another direction. When Qi Tianyu and Qi Baiyu arrived at Qin Huayong's study, Qin Wanru happened to be coming out of Qin Huayong's study. Seeing the 2 brothers opposite, she deliberately stopped and bowed to them. Then she stood up and made way for them. She wanted to leave after they went in. "Second miss." Qi Tianyu suddenly stopped her, but this was not the way he used to call her. "What's the matter, first young Master Qi?" Qin Wanru raised her watery eyes and said calmly. "What's the matter, General Qin?" Qi Tianyu's eyes fell on Qin Wanru's exquisite and beautiful face. His eyes became a little more serious, but his expression was also calm, as if they had never said that they would fight until one of them was dead. "Father is free now. You can ask the servant to inform him." Qin Wanru said calmly. "My sister lives in your mansion. Thank you for your care." Qi Tianyu bowed deeply to Qin Wanru. Qin Wanru moved aside and did not accept his bow. "First young Master Qi, you are too polite. Your sister's matter was arranged by grandma and mother. It has nothing to do with me." Although his words were polite, they were very cold. It seemed that he did not want to have anything to do with Qi Rongji. I have something to do here. I can't accompany you too. Qin Wanru bowed again politely and then slowly left with Yujie. Qi Tianyu stood still and looked at Qin Wanru with an unknown meaning. After a long time, he lowered his eyes and slowly asked the servant to ask to see him. Then the servant in the study went to inform Qin Huayong. Qin Huayong invited them in. Miss, why do you ask them to see the general at this time? Yujie saw the Qi brothers enter Qin Huayong's study together and asked in a low voice with confusion. In fact, they didn't leave. They just stopped at a nearby corridor. Yujie didn't speak until she saw the Qi brothers go in. Father is asking about Duke Xing's mansion. Qin Wanru's smile was so faint that it was almost invisible. Only a trace of ridicule could be seen in her eyes. Why doesn't Madame of Duke Xing give up? Why does she like Miss so much? Although Yujie grew up in Jingxin Monastery and did not know much about the ways of the world, the more she thought about it, the more she felt it was strange. What does she want from Miss? Just now, Nanny Dong came to report that it was faintly spread outside that second Miss Qin wanted to worship Madame of Duke Xing as her adoptive mother. Moreover, it was said that Madame of Duke Xing came to Qin's mansion yesterday for this matter. Now there was some progress in this matter. This matter was just mentioned yesterday, but today it had already spread outside. Since the people of Qin's mansion did not spread it, it must be spread by the people of Duke Xing's mansion. Such a noble aristocratic family had extremely strict family rules. There was only one reason why such a thing with so many loopholes would be spread out. Madame of Duke Xing deliberately let people spread it in this way. Of course, the purpose was to force Qin Wanru to have no choice but to worship her as her adoptive mother. Chapter 251. Although Qin Huayong was appreciated by the emperor, his rank was not high. He could only be regarded as a new noble at most and could not be compared with the old aristocratic families. If such a situation really happened, others would only think that Qin Huayong was arrogant and had great ambition but little talent. He dared to challenge Duke Xing's mansion when he just arrived in the capital city. It was really a little too arrogant. He would even be led to the opposite side of the old aristocratic families, which was a disaster for Qin Huayong. Since this matter had spread to the extent that even Nanny Dong knew, she knew that Madame of Duke Xing was determined to take Qin Wanru into Duke Xing's mansion. Qin Huayong could not say no. Coincidentally, Qi Tianyu came and Qi Baiyu was sitting outside in boredom. She asked Qin Yu to secretly send a note to Qi Baiyu and asked him to lead Qi Tianyu to her father's study. Miss, what does Madame of Duke Xing want to do to you? Seeing Qin Wanru was silent, Yujie became more anxious. She thought it over and over again and still could not understand why Madame of Duke Xing treated Miss like this. Miss and Madame of Duke Xing had never met before. Do we need to plead with Rui and Great Elder Princess? Rui and Great Elder Princess has always been at odds with Duke Xing's mansion. It is not good for her to intervene in this matter. Qin Wanru shook her head and directly denied. Then what should we do? Is Miss really going to be Madame of Duke Xing's daughter? Yujie was so anxious that her eyes were about to turn red. Madame of Duke Xing obviously has a bad intention to Mississippi. If she really enters Duke Xing's mansion in such a name, what will happen at that time will depend on her words. Everyone knew that once a noble family like Duke Xing's mansion entered, it would be as deep as the sea, let alone Duke Xing's mansion. If she really entered, it would be difficult to get out. With the status of Madame of Duke Xing, even if she intervened in Qin Wanru's marriage, no one would say no. They even thought it was Qin Wanru's honor. Let's see what Qi Tianyu will say when he comes out. Qin Wanru smiled slightly, looked at the door of the study, and said meaningfully. She deliberately went to her father's study just now. Of course, it was not a real chance encounter. In the study, Qin Huayong's eyes fell on Qi Tianyu. His eyes were full of pity. Compared to Di Yan, Qi Tianyu, who was handsome and imposing, was much better. Even though his status in the capital city was not prominent, his temperament and his ability to judge people were not something Di Yan could compare with. Madame D herself was useless, and her judgment of people was so poor that she couldn't tell the difference between pearls and jades. How have you been recently? He put down the file in his hand. From Qi Tianyu's point of view, he saw the words, Duke Xing's mansion, and his heart involuntarily moved. Thank you for your concern, uncle. I'm doing well. There are only me and my second brother in the mansion. It's quiet and I can study. Qi Tianyu replied with a smile. That's good. What do you think? Qin Huayong nodded and asked with a smile. Almost, but sometimes I'm still a little confused. I don't know what kind of literature people like in the capital city. Since Qin Huayong asked, Qi Tianyu answered without any grudge. He smiled gently and didn't get angry with Qin Huayong because of Qin Yuru. His attitude was as respectful as ever, and he still treated Qin Huayong as an elder. This made Qin Huayong have a good impression of him. He sighed again and said sincerely, Nephew, don't just read books. Go out and have a look. Maybe the articles you write will be more in line with the taste of the capital city. Although I will help you to inquire about it, it's inappropriate for a general to be too close to civil officials. If civil and military officials were too close, it would arouse the emperor's suspicion. Especially those who could judge people's articles, they must not be ordinary civil officials. Although Qin Huayong had just arrived in the capital city, he still knew this. Even if he wanted to help Qi Tianyu, he couldn't find a good way to break through. This was not an excuse. He really felt that he owed Qi Tianyu for the matter of Qin Yuru. Uncle, I fully understand your feelings for me. Uncle, you don't have to inquire about it for me. It's not good to make friends with important civil officials when you just arrived in the capital city. If I'm lucky enough to be selected one day, someone will suspect you. Uncle, you've just arrived in the capital city, and your foundation is not stable yet. You should be safe. Qi Tianyu said with a smile. His eyes slid over the file, and his face became more and more respectful. Tianyu. Alas. Yuru doesn't deserve you. Qin Huayong sighed deeply and blurted out this sentence. It was not easy to find a son-in-law who was so sensible and could see the situation clearly. If Qin Huayong could get him, it would be a great help to him. Maybe he was not as good as Di Yan now, but it was hard to say in the future. Don't bully a poor young man. Uncle, you're too polite. First Miss and I are not destined to be together. Qi Tianyu said with a sense of loss. Although his smile was still very peaceful, a touch of sadness could be seen in his eyes. After all, the matter of Qin Yuru hurt him. Although he still respected Qin Huayong and had no resentment, it could not erase the sadness in his heart. The affection of childhood sweethearts could not be erased easily. It was good enough that Qi Tianyu did not hate Qin Yuru. Moreover, there were so many rumors outside recently. It was said that Qi Tianyu did not say anything bad about Qin Yuru, which moved Qin Huayong more and more. If I had. Qin Huayong said with guilt. Uncle, you don't have to say it. I know it's useless to think about it now. Don't worry, uncle. I have always been grateful to Qin's mansion. The two misses of your mansion grew up with me. Even in the future, I will treat them as always. Qi Tianyu interrupted Qin Huayong this time and raised his head to say seriously. This made Qin Huayong more and more sad. If Madame D and Yuru had not been so calculative, the current situation would be completely different. Also, they would not be in such a mess. Even this marriage had to be saved by his threat. Both Qin Huayong and Di Yan's reputation would be ruined. Thinking of this, his heart inexplicably moved. In addition to Qin Yuru, he also had Qin Wanru, his daughter. Thinking of this, he was immediately happy. His eyes fell on Qi Tianyu and looked him up and down. He nodded secretly. He had always been optimistic about Qi Tianyu. If Qi Tianyu could pass this exam, he would immediately marry Wanru to Qi Tianyu. Based on the friendship between the two families, Qi's mansion would definitely agree. Thinking of this, a smile appeared on his face, and his attitude became more amiable, but he didn't reveal anything. Although he saw Qi Tianyu, he still had to think about it before he passed the exam. Uncle, I want to learn martial arts. Qi Baiyu stood up and said to Qin Huayong. You want to learn martial arts? Qin Huayong turned his eyes to Qi Baiyu and said with a smile. He knew that Qi Baiyu always loved martial arts. Magistrate Qi's two sons, one was a scholar and the other was a martial artist. They complemented each other. Thinking of this, Qin Huayong immediately thought that he had no children and could not help feeling a little sad. Yes, uncle, I want to learn martial arts. Can you help me find a teacher to teach me? Qi Baiyu took 2 steps forward and said hurriedly. He was young, so he was more open in front of Qin Huayong. When he was in Jiangzhou, he climbed over the wall of Ningyuan Army General's yard more than once and was caught by Qin Huayong several times. Knowing that Qin Huayong was a naughty boy, of course, he laughed. Okay, I'll go back and see if there is a good teacher. I can ask him to come to your mansion to teach you. But you have to learn well. Don't climb over other people's walls. Qi Baiyu's face turned red. He reached out to scratch his head and laughed. Uncle, you are really funny. I'm so old now. How can I still do this kind of thing? I remember that when we were in Jiangzhou, you climbed over the wall of my mansion several times. It doesn't seem to be a long time ago. Qin Huayong also relaxed and smiled. He leaned back and talked to Qi Baiyu. Uncle. Qi Baiyu's face became redder and redder. He stamped his feet hard. The young boy looked annoyed and embarrassed, which made Qin Huayong and Qi Tianyu in the study laugh together. Qi Tianyu also stood up from his seat and walked to the desk. He smiled and bowed to Qin Huayong respectfully. He said, Uncle, please take care of me. My second brother wants to learn martial arts. He said he doesn't want to study anymore. My father also asked him to do that. When we were in Jiangzhou, we also hired a martial arts teacher to teach him. But I'm not familiar with this place, so I don't know who to ask. It's not a trouble. Our families have been friends for generations. Now that your father is not in the capital city, I will take care of you. You don't need to be so polite. Qin Huayong waved his hand and said. Thank you, uncle. Then we won't disturb you any longer. We'll leave now. Qi Tianyu took a step back and bowed to Qin Huayong with Qi Baiyu. Looking at the pair of brothers in front of him, Qin Huayong sighed with emotion again. Although they looked different, they were both extraordinary. After saying a few polite words, Qin Huayong let them leave. No one noticed that when Qi Tianyu approached the desk, he had already seen the file on the desk clearly. Qin Huayong had been reading it before. When he saw them come in, he half-closed the file. The words, Duke Xing's mansion, were clearly written on the cover. As for the half-closed file, there was also the words, Madam of Duke Xing. It was obvious that these words were related to Duke Xing's mansion and Madam of Duke Xing. Did Qin's mansion really want to have a marriage alliance with Duke Xing's mansion? Qi Tianyu and Qi Baiyu walked to the gate of the courtyard quietly. But Qi Tianyu didn't hurry to leave. He stopped, narrowed his eyes and reached out to gently flick his sleeves. A trace of sadness flashed across his eyes. He had thought that Qi Rongji was exaggerating and didn't trust her. But now when he saw the file on Qin Huayong's desk, he took it seriously. Brother, what's wrong? Qi Baiyu looked sideways and asked. Chapter 252. Let's go back. Qin Wanru said after seeing Qi Tianyu and Qi Baiyu leave. She slightly raised the corner of her mouth. It seemed that she had successfully aroused Qi Tianyu's attention. With Qi Rongji's character, Qi Tianyu might not care much about what she said, but now seeing the case file of Duke Xing's mansion in her father's room, it must have aroused his interest. When Qi Tianyu was thinking, he would stop and flick his sleeves. This was his habit or subconscious action, but Qin Wanru saw it clearly. If Qi Tianyu didn't have any idea, he would not stop and think as soon as he walked out of Qin Huayong's yard. She deliberately sent the case file of Duke Xing's mansion to her father's desk to let Qi Tianyu pay attention to this matter and help Qi Rongji get the identity of the adopted daughter. With Qi Rongji's character, it was difficult for her to get the identity of the adopted daughter, but it would be different if Qi Tianyu helped. She just had some guesses about some things. In her last life, she always stayed in the backyard. Even when she entered the palace because of the painting, she always stayed in the room and rarely went out, so she couldn't get any information. Moreover, some memories had been blurred since she was reborn. If her guess was right, Qi Tianyu might have had someone behind him, otherwise Qi Tianyu couldn't stir up a pool of muddy water. As expected, in the next few days, there were more and more rumors, not only about Madame D and Qin Yuru, but also about Qin Wanru. There was even a rumor that Qin Wanru was not Qin Huayong's biological daughter. It was said that she was the posthumous daughter of a deputy general. It was also said that someone could prove that although the deputy general died at that time, his wife was looking for this girl. At first, everyone thought it was a joke, because it was just a rumor about Ningyuan army general's vicious legal wife and eldest daughter. However, in a few days, the rumor became more and more true, and even the rumor about Madame D was suppressed. Some people also said that they saw this madam with their own eyes. She was also the widow of a general. She was now on her way to the capital city. It was said that she found Jiangzhou and went to Ningyuan army general's mansion. However, Ningyuan army general's mansion was empty. Hearing that Ningyuan army general had gone to the capital city, this madam came to the capital city. This news was spread by a few traveling merchants, and they spread it with their noses and eyes. Many people had not forgotten the rebellion a few years ago. At that time, many people had died. There was even a time when the rebel army was even more powerful than before. Some cities were breached one after another, and many people died in the chaos of war. Among them, there was no lack of officials like deputy generals. Some of them were even appointed in the face of danger. They did not even have time to be examined before they directly went into battle. In the end, only their names were left behind when they died. It was extremely difficult to find out the truth. In that rebellion, Qin Huayong was only a deputy general, but in the end, he stood out. On one hand, it was because he was indeed outstanding, but on the other hand, it was because his general and some of his deputies had all died, leaving him as a high-ranking military general. Qin Wanru's origin was originally uncertain and many people didn't believe it. However, because of the background of this rebellion, coupled with the repeated affirmation of some people, the more it spread, the more people felt it was true, and the more versions spread. Some people said that Qin Wanru was an orphan. Her father was an ordinary soldier in the army, and her mother was a washerwoman in the army. Both of her parents died, and Qin Huayong took her in because he felt sorry for her. Others said that Qin Wanru's father was also a famous general. Before he died, he entrusted Qin Wanru to Qin Huayong. After that, he went to the battlefield and never came back, and her mother was also lost in the chaos of war. Some people said that Qin Wanru was a miss from an aristocratic family in the capital city. An aristocratic family was now looking for this miss, but they couldn't confirm her identity at the moment, so they wanted to recognize this aristocratic family as their adopted daughter. There were all kinds of rumors, and people didn't know which one was true. But no matter what, one thing was sure, that Qin Wanru should not be the biological daughter of Ningyuan army general. Otherwise, there would not be so many rumors. Moreover, there was a rumor that second Miss Ning's biological mother was not in Ningyuan army general's mansion. Among the two wives of Ningyuan army general, one was Madame D, who was vicious and wanted to kill second Miss Qin. Even a vicious tiger would not eat its cubs. Of course, she could not be the biological mother. As for the other one, Qin Huayong married in order to take care of second Miss Qin. Of course, she could not be the biological mother of this child. Moreover, there was a servant woman who had worked in Ningyuan Army General's mansion in Jiangzhou. Now she was transferred to the capital city. She also repeatedly said that all of Qin Huayong's concubines were still alive, and second Miss Qin could not be the biological daughter of a dead concubine. Moreover, when second Miss Qin appeared in Qin's mansion, she was already a child, and did not grow up in Qin's mansion. What this servant woman said was the most true. It was said that someone had investigated and found that she was indeed a servant of Ningyuan Army General's mansion in Jiangzhou. It was unknown how she came to the capital city and happened to catch up with this topic. Of course, others believed this, but Qin Wanru didn't believe it. How could a servant woman come to the capital city from thousands of miles away, and happen to catch up with this wave of rumors? As soon as she heard this rumor, she knew that this person was released by Qi Tianyu. Of course, some of these rumors were also released by Qin Wanru herself. This was the effect she wanted. True and false, false and true, so that people could not distinguish them at all. These rumors were spread to Duke Xing's mansion and Madame of Duke Xing. At first, Madame of Duke Xing didn't care about it, but as more and more rumors spread and became more and more unbelievable, Madame of Duke Xing figured it out in her room and was so angry that she kicked over her table. Things changed so fast that she couldn't respond at all. "Madam, please calm down." Nanny Xing immediately asked her servants to leave and persuaded her in a low voice. She had never seen Madame of Duke Xing so angry that she forgot herself. No matter in front of others or behind others, Madame of Duke Xing had always been a dignified and decent madam of a noble family. When would she do such a rude thing? Where did these rumors come from? Madame of Duke Xing asked with a sneer. "I can't find out. It seems that many people are talking about this second Miss Qin overnight. But because everyone paid attention to Qin's mansion before, it is not surprising that they talked about this second Miss Qin. Originally, Madame D, the wife of Ningyuan Army General, wanted to plot against this second Miss Qin, and there is the testimony of the wife of Duke Yangtzu's heir." Nanny Xing said cautiously. Madame of Duke Xing lowered her head and kept silent for a while. Suddenly, she raised her head abruptly and asked, "Is there any evidence that Ningyuan Army General's mansion did it?" "This can't be proved. All the rumors, madam, are not good for Ningyuan Army General's mansion. If second Miss Qin is not the biological daughter of Ningyuan Army General, her status is far lower than that of a biological daughter. Since Ningyuan Army General has kept this secret for so many years, he must intend to raise second Miss Qin as his biological daughter and will not take the initiative to reveal it." Nanny Xing said in confusion. "Is it that bitch Madame D who ruined my plan?" Madame of Duke Xing couldn't hold back her anger and said coldly. "I don't think so. Isn't Madame D locked up now? Even if she wants to stir up trouble, she can't," Nanny Xing said. "Speaking of this, she is the only one who can benefit from it. She may want to drive Qin Wanru away from Ningyuan Army General's mansion and find a reason to explain her previous behavior." "What an ignorant fool!" Madame of Duke Xing scolded coldly. Although she knew that Madame D was unlikely to be the culprit, she was so angry that she couldn't find a place to vent her anger, so she vented all her anger on Madame D. "Have you found those people?" "I asked someone to keep an eye on Ningyuan Army General's mansion and found that the supervisor of the mansion secretly brought a few people back a few days ago. They haven't come out until now," Nanny Xing said flatteringly. Although they didn't get Madame D's letter before, they still found those people because of the actions of Ningyuan Army General's mansion. But now these people had entered Ningyuan Army General's mansion. No matter how powerful Madame of Duke Xing was, she couldn't reach into Ningyuan Army General's mansion now. "What a useless fool. What have you done before? You said that you should wait for the most suitable opportunity to let these people ruin Madame Shui's reputation. Now, even the people are gone. With Qin Huayong's means, it is impossible for these people to say anything wrong about Madame Shui. No wonder they are locked up now. They are really useless. Madame of Duke Xing sneered. Madame D is indeed a little stupid. Otherwise, she wouldn't have. Nanny Xing said meaningfully. She didn't finish her words, but Madame of Duke Xing understood it. She sneered and didn't say anything more. After thinking for a while, she changed the topic. Where did the most mysterious sentence come from? Which sentence? Nanny Xing had just told Madame of Duke Xing all the rumors outside. But this time the topic changed so quickly that she couldn't change it for a while, so she asked subconsciously. After asking, she realized that it was inappropriate. She hurriedly lowered her head and said in a panic, "This. I don't know. I asked someone to check it, but like all the rumors, I don't know where it came from. But there is one thing I can prove. It has nothing to do with Ningyuan Army General's mansion. It can't be spread by someone in Ningyuan Army General's mansion." Her words made Madame of Duke Xing silent for a while. Her face became colder and colder. After thinking for a while, she was about to say something. Suddenly she heard a servant girl outside saying loudly, "Duke! Duke! Duke! Duke!" Then more servants greeted them. Madame of Duke Xing glanced at Nanny Sheng. Nanny Xing understood. She hurriedly walked to the door, opened the slightly closed door, and slightly lifted the curtain. As soon as she lifted the curtain, she saw the round and fat Duke Xing walk in with his hands clasped behind his back with a serious face. "Duke!" After he came in, Nanny Xing put down the curtain in her hands and bowed to Duke Xing. Duke Xing ignored her, strode in, and sat down in the chair beside Madame of Duke Xing. The serious look on his face became gloomy, which was completely different from how he looked in front of others. Others only knew that Duke Xing was a kind fat man. He was kind to everyone and seemed to have a good temper. He and Madame of Duke Xing were dignified and decent. They could be said to be a model couple in aristocratic families and could be regarded as a couple with a very good reputation. But at the moment, they both looked gloomy. Duke Xing waved his hand, and Nanny Xing left silently. She carefully closed the door for them and took 2 steps back to guard outside the door. Chapter 253. It has been said that I will take her as my daughter. How can I stop it? Madame of Duke Xing's body shook, and her beautiful face showed irrepressible anger. In order to create more pressure on Qin's mansion, she deliberately visited many powerful madams with various reasons the next day. Although she didn't explicitly say that she would accept Qin Wanru as her adopted daughter, she did implicitly express that she would accept an adopted daughter. She had also visited Qin Wanru before and was very satisfied with her. She also expressed that she valued this adopted daughter very much. After recognizing her as a relative, she would be brought to Duke Xing's mansion to be raised. Of course, she didn't say it out loud to show her self-restraint. Before the matter was officially concluded, of course, she couldn't casually say it out loud. "You still want to acknowledge her? Does that mean that the rumor is true?" Duke Xing said coldly with an increasingly cold look. He raised his heavy eyelids, looked at Madame of Duke Xing, and stood up. "That's it." After saying that, he lifted his leg and was about to leave. "I can't do this. What will others think of me? I will become a joke in the whole circle of madams of aristocratic families." Madame of Duke Xing also stood up and said discontentedly. Her words could be said with certainty, and she almost directly named Qin Wanru. If she flinched at this time, she would only be laughed at by those madams, and she would also be laughed at. Madame of Duke Xing could not afford to lose face. "If I don't do this, what else do you want?" Duke Xing said unhappily, with a faint light flashing in his eyes, which was unclear. "There is more than one maid in Qin's mansion. Does Qin Huayong have another maid?" Madame of Duke Xing said after a moment of silence. Even if she couldn't accept Qin Wanru, she had to accept one. She didn't want to be a joke in the circle of madams of aristocratic families. If she could talk nonsense about such a thing, who would believe her in the future? Moreover, this kind of quarrel was something that misses of aristocratic families had been forbidden since they were young, which was not in line with Madame of Duke Xing's previous image of a lady from a respectable family. This would affect Madame of Duke Xing's image. Don't tell me you want to adopt Qin Huayong's infamous eldest daughter. Our Duke Xing's mansion will not accept such a person with a bad reputation. Duke Xing refused directly. What should I do? I can't be so shameful. Madame of Duke Xing was stunned for a moment and said discontentedly. Are you trying to attract attention? Duke Xing looked at Madame of Duke Xing sharply, and Madame of Duke Xing had to lower her head. Let's just forget about it. Don't mention it again. In addition to the Qin sisters, there is another person living in the Qin's mansion. She is the daughter of the magistrate of Jiangzhou. I recognize her. Seeing that Duke Xing was about to leave, Madame of Duke Xing also became anxious and said loudly. Duke Xing paused and said without looking back, "It's up to you." After he finished speaking, he lifted the curtain, pushed open the door, and walked out of the room. His face had returned to its usual calmness, but the servants in the courtyard all held their breath, not daring to make a sound. Nanny Sheng looked at the black shoes standing in front of her and did not dare to move. You are Madame's confidant. In the future, you still have to persuade Madame. You can't be as frivolous as that day. Duke Xing said gently. Yes, High Duke, I understand. Nanny Sheng understood what Duke Xing was talking about. She shivered more and more, and her whole back was bent. That's good. Madame doesn't understand some things very well, but you are different. You used to watch me grow up, and I have always respected you. So you should persuade Madame, lest she does something unrealistic. Duke Xing became more and more gentle. Everyone in the courtyard knew that Nanny Sheng's identity was not simple. Although she was Madame of Duke Xing's trusted subordinate, she was not brought by Madame from her maiden home, but Duke Xing's wet nurse. This identity was a deterrent to the people in the courtyard, and also to Madame of Duke Xing. Yes, High Duke, I understand. Nanny Sheng did not mean to take advantage of her seniority at all, and she looked more and more respectful. Duke Xing glanced at Nanny Sheng, smiled, and walked out very politely. His round smile was very much in line with his image as a fatty. After he left the courtyard, Nanny Sheng gently knocked on the door. Come in. Madame of Duke Xing's somewhat cold voice came from the room. Obviously, she had not recovered yet. Compared with Duke Xing, who had changed his look as soon as he went out, Madame of Duke Xing's mood adjusted much slower. When Nanny Sheng entered the room, she found that although Madame of Duke Xing's face was still very pale, she was not as gloomy as before, and her expression was not bad. Go to prepare the 4 gifts and accept the girl from Qi's mansion as your adopted daughter. Madame of Duke Xing looked at the teacup on the table and said slowly. She was not in a hurry, so it was obvious that she had really made this decision instead of being impulsive. Madam, do you really want to accept Miss Qi as your adopted daughter? Nanny Sheng was stunned for a moment, and hurriedly raised her head and asked. If we don't do this, how can we end this matter? Now we can only take one step at a time. It doesn't matter if there are more or less people in our mansion, so it's okay to accept an adopted daughter. It's just a matter of putting on some dowry. It's not a big deal. Madame of Duke Xing said coldly. There was a flash of anger in her eyes. She still didn't know who was behind all this. If she knew who it was, she would definitely cut that person into pieces. It was such a good move, but because of these rumors, she had to restrain herself. She even took in Qi Rongji, who didn't know what she was doing, into her team. Since she saw Qi Rongji, she had deeply disliked her. She was just a greedy and vain woman who wanted to curry favor with her. Madame of Duke Xing had seen many such women, so she was really not interested in them. But now, she could only do this. It's good that Madame can think in this way. I originally wanted to persuade Madame to change someone else. Since Miss Qi lives in Qin's mansion, it makes sense that Madame went to Qin's mansion before. Although Miss Qi is not good, at least her reputation is not stained. She can be raised in our mansion. Nanny Xing thought for a moment and told the truth. After saying this, she was afraid that Madame of Duke Xing couldn't understand, so she lowered her voice and said implicitly, "Just now, Duke asked me to persuade Madame more. He said that Madame might be wrong about something. It would be better if she didn't say this." As soon as she said this, Madame of Duke Xing's eyes and brows became fierce. She sneered again and again. What does he mean? Wrong? Isn't he talking about that set of plates? It was originally a good thing, but who knows that Madame D and Countess Yong are so hopeless that they can't even handle such a small matter. Speaking of this, Madame of Duke Xing was also full of anger. This kind of thing should have been solved in private with everyone knowing it. She didn't really want to punish Qin Wanru, but she just wanted to hold a weakness of Qin's mansion. She could even threaten Madame Dowager and Qin Huayong to make her shut up forever. This kind of thing had no impact on Qin Huayong's official career. Even if Qin Huayong had doubts, he would not do anything. Moreover, she could also offer Qin Huayong some other good things. If Qin Huayong really swallowed everything, she could even promise to give Qin Huayong's only daughter some benefits, so that when she married into Duke Yong's mansion, she would no longer be in a weak position. But now because of Madame D and Countess Yong's hopelessness, this matter actually failed. Not only did it fail, but it also spread to Duke Xing's ears. For this reason, Duke Xing repeatedly reminded her, and even got angry in her room. Every time she thought of this matter, Madame of Duke Xing was so angry that smoke came out of her 7 orifices. It was Madame D and Countess Yong, these two stupid people, who ruined it. Madame of Duke Xing took a deep breath, suppressed the annoyance in her heart, and said, "Take that box of beads, give the other 4 gifts to Qi Rongji, and find time to arrange for her to enter Duke Xing's mansion. Find a courtyard for her to live in, and send this box of beads to Qin Wanru." "Madam, that is your favorite pearl, and you said it is for first miss," Nanny Xing exclaimed. "Give it to her first, now she is more important." Madame of Duke Xing sneered and said slowly in a low voice. Now she really took this matter to heart. Originally it was just an idle move. In this case, she just had to pay more attention, and she did not believe that she would fail. Go to Qin Yuru's place to have a look, and also send a pair of earrings. When the news that Madame of Duke Xing wanted to accept Qi Rongji as her adopted daughter spread to Qin's mansion, the whole mansion was shocked, and no one expected the result. That day, Madame of Duke Xing's meaning was very obvious, and she directly refused Qi Rongji. Why did she suddenly change her mind now? Although Madame Dowager was not willing to accept Qin Wanru as the adopted daughter of Duke Xing, she was still very surprised by the current situation, so she specially called Qin Wanru to Xining Pavilion for this reason. She comforted Qin Wanru for a long time, and she was afraid that Qin Wanru would not think it through. After all, she was still a child, and although she was unwilling, she might not be able to accept it because of her face. Qin Wanru herself did not see disappointment at all, and comforted Madame Dowager with a smile, making Madame Dowager beam with joy, and then she came back with Yujie. This matter went so smoothly, which really made Qin Wanru feel a little surprised, but it also made Qin Wanru more and more evidence that there was someone behind Qi Tianyu, and it was a person with real power, who had the strength to fight against Madame of Duke Xing in the capital city, and also made her unable to investigate. In fact, there were not many people like this. In Qin Wanru's mind, she had a vague plan to put all these very suspicious people together. Standing still, looking at the first plum blossom on the branch, she smiled coldly. In the last life, what she saw was what others wanted her to see. The tip of the iceberg, what was slowly revealed in this life was the truth. It was a harsher fact than her death in the waste in the last life. She tore off all the fake veils. In this life, she wanted to see clearly, and she would not die unjustly and inexplicably like in the last life. Second Miss Qin. On the road behind the plum blossom tree, 3 servant girls turned. The first servant girl was obviously a principal servant girl with an extraordinary bearing. When she saw Qin Wanru, she came forward with a smile and bowed to her generously. Chapter 254. Second Miss Qin, I'm from Duke Xing's mansion. This time I come here to arrange for our madam to recognize Miss Qi as her adopted daughter. The principal servant girl smiled gently and politely. Qin Wanru nodded. This servant girl looked familiar. She had come to the mansion with Madam of Duke Xing before. Our madam liked second miss very much. Originally, she sincerely wanted to adopt second miss as her daughter. Unexpectedly, the rumors were too harsh. Our old madam rebuked our madam and had no choice but to change our madam. Anyway, our madam likes second miss the most. Even if they are not destined to be mother and daughter, she asked me to tell second miss that if you have any problems in the future, you can tell our madam directly. Our madam will try her best to help. The principal servant girl said eloquently. She said all the words that Madam of Duke Xing ordered in one breath. Then she waved to a servant girl behind her. The servant girl stepped forward and respectfully presented a gift box in her hand to Qin Wanru. I originally wanted to find second Mississippi. Now I happen to meet you, so I didn't have to walk a few steps. This box of pearls was awarded to our madam by the Empress, but she also allowed our madam to give it as a gift. It can be made into earrings or necklaces. They are all excellent. Originally, our madam specially kept it for our first Mississippi. But this matter, our madam felt quite guilty, so she gave it to second Miss Qin as an apology. The principal servant girl stepped forward and opened the lid of the box. Immediately, everyone was attracted by the pearls in the box. The pearls were not big or small, and each of them was round. The rarest thing was that these pearls were almost the same size. In this way, they were indeed excellent to be matched with headwear or other accessories. There were a lot of pearls in such a box, and each of them was of top grade. It took a lot of effort to take them out. What was more, it was awarded by the Empress. Of course, it was clear that it could be given to others, which also meant that there was no need to worry about it. This, originally belonged to your first Mississippi. I still dare not accept it. Qin Wanru's long eyelashes fluttered. She shook her head with a smile and turned her eyes away from the pearls. Her watery eyes looked very pure and indifferent. She really didn't like these pearls very much. The principal maid had been with Duke Xing for a long time and had seen many misses. Although many of them said no, they behaved very greedily. It was rare to see such a calm and composed miss, so she couldn't help but think highly of Qin Wanru. Second Miss Qin, our madam said that our first miss has a lot of jewelry, and she doesn't like to wear pearls and jade. Second miss, you are younger than our first miss and you are at the age to dress up. This box of pearls is just right for you. It is a token of our madam's sincerity. Please don't refuse it. The chief maid was very good at talking and smiled. If Qin Wanru still didn't accept it, it meant that she didn't accept Madam of Duke Xing's modesty, which was a bit pretentious. Thank your wife for me. Qin Wanru smiled slightly, and the smile in her eyes became deeper. Her eyes flashed over the hand of another servant girl. The servant girl also had a small gift box in her hand, which was very small. It looked like small jewelry such as hairpins, earrings, and flower pearls. She lowered her head and stood behind the principal maid in a well-behaved manner. Yujia stepped forward and took the box from the servant girl's hand, and then stood behind Qin Wanru. How is first Miss Qi's preparation? Since she had received Madam of Duke Xing's salute, Qin Wanru couldn't completely stay out of it, so she said with a smile. Miss Qi's preparation has been done, but it can be done after our madam is ready. But our madam said that Miss Qi is not alone in the capital city, and there are 2 brothers. We have to discuss this matter with Miss Qi's 2 brothers, so we have to get their consent. The principal maid answered with a smile. She meant that Qi Rongji had been ready and was eager to go to Duke Xing's mansion to be a miss, but Duke Xing's mansion was not in a hurry, and seemed to take it slowly according to the rules. Is first Miss Chi going to the House of Chi's mansion to wait for the news? Qin Wanru fluttered her long eyelashes and asked curiously. This matter is not urgent. Let's wait for the two childs of Chi's mansion to confirm it first. There are no elders in the House of Chi's mansion in the capital city. Our madam thinks that it is more suitable for first Miss Chi to live in Ningyuan Army General's mansion first. When the matter of recognizing relatives is completed, first Miss Chi will be invited to live in our mansion. The principal maid's answer was very appropriate, and it was obvious that she was well trained. Qin Wanru gently pursed her red lips, and a trace of deepness flashed across her watery eyes. This meant that the matter was gradually settled, and Chi Rongji would live in her mansion for a period of time. Has first Miss Chi said it just now? Qin Wanru calmly turned her eyes to the small gift box left in the hand of the servant girl. Since Madame of Duke Xing wanted to accept Chi Rongji with great fanfare, it was impossible for her to be so embarrassed and send such a small gift box to Chi Rongji. This gift should have been sent out, and if she guessed correctly, this gift box should be for Qin Yuru. Madame D was watched. Although Qin Yuru was grounded before, only she was grounded. Other people could still go in to see her. The first person to send a gift should be Chi Rongji. However, according to Chi Rongji's character, when she saw there were two gift boxes, she would definitely inquire about who was sent to and what was sent. It has been sent, and it has been settled with first Miss Chi. During this period of time, we have to trouble second Miss Qin to take care of first Miss Chi. Our madam is very grateful. The principal maid's attitude was very low, and her words were full of gratitude to Qin Wanru. If Qin Wanru had not secretly intervened in this matter, she would definitely think that this Madame of Duke Xing really liked her. However, due to the formality, she could not accept Qin Wanru as her adopted daughter. However, her intention was the same as that of an adopted daughter, and even more than that of Chi Rongji. In that case, should he express his gratitude as well? Thank you very much, I will. Qin Wanru smiled subtly. Second Miss Qin, I have to trouble you to do one thing. I don't know if it is possible. The principal maid asked with a smile. What's the matter? Qin Wanru said lazily. There is a pair of earrings in this gift box, which is what our madam wants to give to first Miss Qin. However, when I went to see first Miss Qin just now, I found that the people in the yard did not allow me to go in. This time, I came here under the order of our madam. Our madam has sent gifts to the three misses in the mansion, but this time the gifts were not sent to first Miss Qin. I am afraid that our madam will blame me, so I want to ask second Miss Qin for a favor. The principal maid looked embarrassed and looked at Qin Wanru imploringly. This is for big sister. Qin Wanru raised her eyes and seemed to be moved to look at the gift box in the hands of the servant girl. She was such a big box of pearls, while Qin Yuru was just a pair of small earrings. From this point of view, Qin Yuru could not be compared with her. This contrast was really a little strong. Qin Yuru was only grounded before, but after the incident of the map in Nanny Xing's hands, Qin Huayong asked people to guard her yard. Although it was not like Madame D, who did not allow anyone to go in and out at will, those who went in must have enough reasons. It was said that Qin Yuru was not allowed to come out before she finished copying the women's precepts and women's rules 100 times. Yes, this is for first Miss Qin by our madam. There are 3 misses in the mansion, but only 2 misses were sent. I am afraid that first Miss Qin will think too much. The principal maid explained. Therefore, this gift was really too small, just to cover Qin Yuru's face. This kind of thing was actually a small matter. Moreover, Madame of Duke Xing had shown great kindness to her before. If Qin Wanru did not help, it would be really unreasonable. Then keep it. I will give it to big sister later. Qin Wanru smiled elegantly. Her elegant smile matched with her watery eyes seemed to be able to see through people's hearts. Being stared at, the principal servant girl's heart skipped a beat and she hurriedly lowered her head. But then she also laughed. Even if the second Miss Qin was born smart, How much could an 11-year-old girl who had not experienced anything know? She bowed sideways and respectfully bowed to Qin Wanru. Thank you, second Miss Qin. Another servant girl holding the small gift box came forward. Yujie took the small gift box from the servant girl. Second Miss Qin, then I will go back first. Second Miss Qin, please. The servant girl bowed politely again. Qin Wanru nodded slightly. The principal maid turned and left with the two little servant girls. Second miss, let's go back to our yard first. I will put down the things and then give the gift to first Miss Qin. Yujie said after watching several servant girls leave. If not for that box of precious pearls, perhaps the earrings would also be good. But if compared with this box of pearls, the earrings would definitely be less valuable. Qin Yuru had always thought highly of herself and was not the kind of person who could be compared with others. After seeing the earrings, it was hard to say what she would do. Qin Yuru had been very sullen recently. She had no place to vent her anger. She was not willing to go to Qin Wanru at this time. You don't have to go back first. Just go to see big sister. After all, we are sisters. As a younger sister, I should send some warmth to big sister at this time. Qin Wanru raised her willowy eyebrows and looked at a corner of the plum forest. This plum forest was actually not big. There were only a dozen trees, but there were many plum blossoms. The plum fragrance was bursting. It was an excellent place to appreciate plum blossoms in Qin's mansion. What if first Miss Qin is angry? Yujie said worriedly. She could be sure that if she went there like this, she would definitely cause trouble again. So what? In the past, big sister often came to me. At this time, shouldn't I have a legitimate reason to see big sister? Qin Wanru smiled and looked quite proud. She looked at the big gift box in Yujie's hand. She lifted the lid, picked up a pearl inside, and looked at it in the sun. I heard that there is a kind of pearl in the Nan Kingdom. Although it is not big, it is extremely rare. When strung together, it will make the pearl shine and polish, and it can also maintain the color of the face. In the past, big sister liked to use pearl powder to moisten her face. If you use this kind of pearl, the color will be more pleasant, right? Qin Wanru smiled more arrogantly. Her delicate little face was proud and complacent at the moment. There was a touch of provocation in her narrowed watery eyes. At first glance, it was obvious that she was up to no good. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.